Good afternoon and welcome to the third and final day of the European Crowdfunding Network's ECN CrowdCamp in Prague. My name is Oliver Geider. I'm here to represent the European Crowdfunding Network and I will guide you through the day. And thank you for joining us again for the last day. And today I would like to introduce you to my co-host, Ira Rubenstein. Ira, hello. How are you doing?
I'm doing really well. Thank you very much. I'm very happy to be here. I was happy when Dalia Berturney at Deloitte suggested that I might take this role opposite you in the chair. And having watched the last 2 days, it's really, I would almost say, an honor to be able to contribute to the content of this event, which is, I think, so far been quite interesting and very compelling.
Yes, and you're going to moderate our panel discussion today as well, so we will see more of you and have your insight during that session as well. From your background, you have quite a bit of knowledge on startup economy, incubation. What interests you in crowdfunding?
Well, actually, crossover of two areas of interest. I started in my career in finance in alternative and renewable energy, and I've spent almost 3 decades in that area, primarily from a point of view of financing projects and also to some extent dealing with technologies. And I spent my first 2 decades doing that in New York, and I've now been here in Prague over a decade doing similar work. But my other interest is that I joined the administrative staff of Czech Technical University here, which is the largest engineering and oldest engineering school in Central Europe, as mentor to faculty and students who are developing early stage businesses. And the crossover of looking at the sustainability activities in finance that I've been involved in, coupled with the need for small and early capital in innovation, really makes, for me, crowdfunding a very interesting subject. And it's an area I've been following for some period of time. So to me, I find this interesting, A, to be able to contribute my background and knowledge in sustainability to the discussion, and also to learn from a lot of the presentations that have been made in the last 2 days and we'll hear today.
Yes, yes. But if I understand right, the crowdfunding market is, of course, let's say, limited still in the Czech Republic. Have you already had any expertise with seeing that startups that you deal with that ask for crowdfunding? Do they want to work with that, or?
I haven't seen a tremendous amount of focus on crowdfunding here. And we have some activity here, both on equity crowdfunding and through lending platforms. So there has been some, but I think you're right in that it has still today a much lower profile than it might have in other locations. And one of the challenges and opportunities for us, both in the Czech Republic and also in the larger region here in Central Europe, is to actually sort of bring crowdfunding opportunities more to the fore, both for existing and to-be-built platforms, but also to make potential recipients of that funding aware of the opportunity to use platforms for that purpose.
Yeah, and we earlier, before the show, already discussed in some ways that we might engage in that. We're talking about sustainable finance, of course, today with the focus of crowdfunding for sustainable development or sustainable businesses. Is there a market in the Czech Republic for sustainable businesses and everything that comes with it? And how does that compare maybe to other countries?
I actually think that there's a larger market than people realize. And I think crowdfunding has a very interesting role to play there, because I think the market really starts with the individual investor or potential investor who cares about these issues at a personal level for themselves, for their families, for their children, even much more so than institutional investors who in a lot of cases are still married to patterns that they've worked with in the past for investment into larger scale industries, maybe some old industries, given the legacy issues here. So I think allowing individuals to set out on their own path and giving them the opportunity to do that through use of crowdfunding platforms is a really intriguing way to sort of move the yardstick on investing based on the activity of the individual investor.
Yeah, and we had this yesterday in the opening from Ellie Schlein. She referred a little bit to some of the activities that we are also doing jointly in Italy, where we've built with a number of partners an education program to teach interested parties how to use crowdfunding, but also how to manage crowdfunding transactions on the platform side and create, if you want, some sort of standards, which we are now also looking to export into other countries. We're working on this in Spain. Do you see that this could be a market here, that in let's say Central Europe, that people have an interest to learn about crowdfunding, or haven't we reached that stage yet?
No, I think that there's a real interest. I think that there is capacity here, whether you look at, for instance, the municipal or regional level of government, if you look at various universities and innovation centers, and again, you look at individual investors and advisors to those investors, I think at that level, though, that combination of institutions and individuals, I think, are very interested to find additional means and methods to look at opportunities that make sense to them. And I think sustainability is very high on their agenda of requirements, which you couldn't have said maybe 4 or 5 years ago, but I think now it's very clear that that's the case.
Yeah. But we are not aware of any of such collaborations that already exist, not with crowdfunding, but maybe with other...
Not at the moment in the way you're talking about, but I think what you've been able to help make happen in Italy and now in Spain is really interesting as a model, and I think it may have some real applicability here in the region.
Let's see what we can do about this. We today have an interesting program coming forward. We will introduce you slightly now to the upcoming speakers. And then we have a little talk again with Ira and introduce you through the agenda, which you can see we have an opening after our little chat here from Olivier Schulbaum. He is with Goteo in Spain. Goteo is primarily a reward-based crowdfunding platform, so not financial services, but that has nonetheless, and he will tell us all about it, worked with the Sustainable Finance Development Goals, so they know how to apply this. And they use in their reward-based model also match funding through institutional funds from government agencies. So that will be the opening today. And then we have 2 keynotes. The first one will be Daniel Fasci, and we already heard yesterday that, of course, the European Investment Fund and the European Investment Group, they belong together. So he will give us the overall strategy of what the EIB is doing, and also explain a bit what the EIB as a group may be able to do for crowdfunding in the future. I mean, this is for me an important part, that the institutions that manage capital from the European Commission, but also their own capital from the member states, they can drive activities into member states.
I think that's true, and I think they also have the ability to either by push or pull leverage private and institutional capital forward to match them and join them. And in that sense, they have a very high value as parties to become engaged.
Yes. And so I'm looking forward to this. And then we have a second keynote. He's from Luxembourg. That's Arno Gillen, originally with a microfinance background, and we spent some time together years ago. He has created a fund advisor, and they set up fund structures for impact investors very successfully, and has a lot of expertise on the European market for how impact investing is best structured and how you can pull in institutional funds. And so he will tell us a bit about their model, the market, where they work, but also what this means for crowdfunding and how crowdfunding could be integrated in this. And he already was interested years ago to enter the crowdfunding market where it wasn't quite ready. But we saw yesterday, and today we will see it as well, and the day before that, there are platforms, and they are becoming active, and they are in a way sizable enough to suggest that we have a market here that will be growing.
I think that's true, and I think increasingly you're seeing, as the level of wealth rises in the region, which has happened, you're seeing people do more in the way of support of social investment, impact investment. And so again, this, I think, prepares the way for people to understand and be able to utilize crowdfunding and crowdfunding platforms because they already have some experience in these other related areas.
Yes, and I mean, we discussed it earlier as well. There's a possibility, of course, we need to see how it rolls out, but that the digital, let's say, speed that crowdfunding can now integrate in some of the processes going forward as well, and the ease with which they can help transfer money across borders under the new regulation, hopefully, may also incentivize other alternative finance actors to engage more in crowdfunding or crowdfunding-like structures for sustainable investment?
I think that's true, because it's going to make it easier to look at larger scale activities or activities that actually, where the businesses themselves function regionally and cross-border, which is obviously becoming more common in the EU, and it will allow investors to basically play in that space more flexibly.
Yeah, and then we have the panel, of course, which you are moderating, where we look at largely the lessons learned from the capital markets.
Yeah.
So,
and I'm particularly pleased with the panel because I think it gives perspective on two issues. One is, what's going on now where platforms are already implementing the SDGs and other standards for investment, but also where additional tools and data are coming forward to allow not only the platforms, but also investors themselves to get comfortable with investments that they may be looking at and choose to make.
Yeah.
And I think we're going to get both elements of that in the discussion among the panelists.
Very good. Okay, then let's start, and let's see if Olivier Schulbaum is online. Let's have a look if he appears. Olivier, can you hear us?
Hey, hi.
Hi.
Perfectly.
Thank you very much for joining us. How is the weather where
You're
you
welcome.
are?
It's very sunny, so I'm sending some shiny stars to you.
Good. Thank you very much. We have the sun here today as well. It wasn't so the other days, but today is good.
Good.
You have, I think, prepared some
Yes,
thoughts
I do.
on your work and sustainability. Please,
Yes.
we may interrupt you to ask you a question if the audience will send us
No
a question.
problem.
We have an
Yes.
email address that questions can be sent to, which will be shown on the bottom of the screen. Please use it. It's the only way you can interact really with us. But otherwise, Olivier, it's I think the floor is yours, and you excite
Thanks.
us.
Thanks a lot. So I'm going to have slides, so let's make sure that you can see them. That's
Yes.
perfect.
They're there.
Okay, talking about shiny stars, since the European Crowdfunding Network logos has got 3 shiny stars, I think it's a good bridge. And I'd like to say thank you from Olivier to Oliver for having me today. So I'm not representing the investor's perspective, and I think that's good, but I do represent transparency, sustainability, and commitment to SDGs. And bridging on what Ira was just saying, and I think it's one of the ideas of the last panel, I want to share with you some insights on how we can integrate SDGs with crowdfunding platforms, but also generate open data sets, which are very relevant. Basically to accelerate knowledge about sustainability and citizen participation. Accelerate knowledge, but also, I guess, practice. So a little bit I like this type of pictures, so I'm sorry to use them, but this is basically the challenge right now. So this is how the road to Agenda 2030 looks like. So how will we combine SDG goals, reaching them, and social distancing? So probably we're gonna lose some of the growing curve of empathy and solidarity, which is happening right now because of the COVID. And let's see how we can maintain that energy. So it's basically a challenge. So of course, and you have been talking in the last days about why evaluating the progress on SDGs is so important, and what's the role of crowdfunding in making a positive impact in line with the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. So we all believe that the need and urgency to prioritize SDGs in international research, I'm talking about research here, and sustainable development efforts are widely accepted. So we all agree with this. Nevertheless, given that the SDGs were introduced in 2015, we see basically that implementation and impact and research on local context are still scarce. Basically, the connection of SDGs crowdfunding with civic mobilization, which is happening right now, but as is happening usually in the last decade, beyond institutional and private action. So if you look at the picture, and I'm sure you can see on the screen, but what you see here, this sailing is with looks like SDG colors. It's basically a headquarters in a Matavanero eco-village in Leon. And that's the typical project that will be never reported on any SDG report because it has no institutional support, neither private support. So basically we know, because we know about these SDGs, that they probably have lots to do with SDG 4, education, SDG 11 and SDG 13, climate change issues are quite involved here. But basically, this project is under the radar, below the radar. So what can we do as a crowdfunding platform to make sure that we report also on these beautiful experiences happening? And that's basically what crowdfunding can help with. And basically, that project was founded on GoTo platform, the platform I'm co-founder of. So we started to ask ourselves, how can we, really commit to SDGs and make sure that we create a dialogue between policymakers and projects which are still, or initiatives which are still below the radar. So how can we do that? So we know we have, since we're existing as a platform, we have generated all sorts of data. So we open source, we have an API, and I think we have a good data model. And so we have data on how solidarity, transparency, democratic innovation, and community building is really creating social impact. It would be a shame not to, relate them with SDGs. So basically, that's what we've been at in the last 2 years. So I'd like to celebrate the publication of a paper in a very important journal called Nature, in a section that they call scientific data. So it's basically about publishing data sets and analyzing them. And we just published together with the Demons Research Group from the Open University in Catalonia and the GoTo Foundation together on releasing a data sets to see how crowdfunding and match funding, which Oliver just mentioned, I'll talk about that a bit later, data is connecting with sustainable development goals. So I'll tell a bit about that in the second part of my talk, but I'd like before to look at it a bit at the situation we're all facing now. So basically, COVID-19 is presenting us with an enormous challenge as a planet and nations and as citizens. So we know about that. I think it's the first time we see so many, and people like, every day look at so many data on newspapers. We've seen these curves in every country, how measures from governments affects or not the curve to be flattened or not. But basically, the simple message is that the first time the data visualization is so powerful, and it's a simple one. So how can we as citizens, public governments, and enterprises flatten the curve? Flatten the curve would means grow the care. So I'm talking here about, pumping up the care capacity. So we need really to think about radical issues on healthcare systems capacity and how we can resolve that. And I guess many opportunities can raise from that. So that's a very self-explainable picture. So I'd like to take 5 seconds just to have a short reflection while I'm drinking water. So this is basically a real challenge here. So we see that in light of these, let's say, devastating impacts, so basically we have inequalities and cracks due to the pandemic across Europe and the rest of the world. I guess, or we guess, SDGs are still a pathway to long-term sustainability, but we have new data coming in. We have basically new issues. So if you look at SDG number 5, gender equality, there's more gender violence, there's more work conditions, situations which we'll have to deal with. If you look at health, of course, devastating effects on health systems, it's pretty clear. So we need for solutions in supplies and infrastructure. And that's also an opportunity of probably impact investment at some point. We need to look at decent work and economic growth. And if you look at, we don't have time, but each of these SDGs have new data coming in. So it's really a challenge. So if you look, for example, the ocean pollution SDG number 14, we have this mismanagement of single-use protective materials. So we have all these masks showing up in the sea. So that are impactful pictures. And that's also an opportunity for citizens to be more involved, basically, and understand what we talk about when we talk about SDGs, which is pretty policymaker language. I'll come back to that later. Just a scary data here, talking about investment. So in the last 3 months, investors moved around 90 billion US dollar out of emerging markets. So that's the largest outflow ever recorded. So these are data from United Nations ESCAP from the Asia and the Pacific area. That's really a challenge we need to face. That means we won't reach the goal. We won't reach them with these conditions. And then we have to talk about the bigger waves to come and overcome. So the COVID wave or the COVID curve looks very small if you look at the global heating and the climate change curve, which is coming. So I guess the experiences we had to face in the last 3 or 4 months are really lessons to be, more stronger and have better strategies on how we will basically face the new waves to come. So I guess definitely the COVID-19 is bringing extraordinary challenges to the achievement of the SDGs. We have a real problem here. So, but it also brings extraordinary opportunities for solidarity, let's say. So I'd just like to share an example, and it's interesting because it's a kind of a match collaboration between the Aragon regional government and a series or networks of activists, volunteers, makers, companies, and universities and social organizations who have came together just as an open innovation laboratory to organize and help during the health alert. So this is basically about the network of citizen publishing alerts on a map. So of course we have positive curves to look at. We're flattening the curves of pandemic, but we also see an acceleration of the curve of solidarity and participation. So this is, for example, the curve of the number of pins published on the map of Fred de la Courba, Flatten the Curve project, which means it's now almost 10,000 pins on the map, which says rather an offer or a demand from the citizens related to COVID issue. And more than almost 1,000 initiatives have already been published, and lots of hackathons have been organized. It's incredible because it's all based on open source tools and open source philosophy. So that's good, talking about the regional government strategy. And it has been replicated in 22 countries, mainly in South America. So I think that's a perfect example. So I'd like to see that type of examples of open source impact and replication within the crowdfunding network, not only talking about data. Of course, as a platform, we had to have a reflection. So we opened up 3 months or 4 months ago, Corona Zero, which is a 0% crowdfunding commission channel. And basically, it's basically to help this range of solidarity campaigns bringing up to combat the COVID to be sustainable and happen. So just like very quickly, you've seen that on other platforms. We have makers which are printing open source ventilators parts, face shields, and sewing masks, facing critical shortage in medical supplies. Talking about an initiative we've been launching together with various Catalan solidarity and economy sector organizations, such as credit cooperatives, such as financing cooperatives, such as health insurance cooperatives, what we call a cooperative contingency fund to support initiatives that are coordinating a response to the social and health emergency. So this is how they look like. So we talk about like agroecological projects and COPs. We talk about disabled services, disabled people services. We talk about riders cooperatives, so that's an important thing. So food delivery. So how do we deal with workers' rights in that sector? So that's pretty impressive how this has been growing. I'd just like to cite another project, which is also an object of a study of a previous European crowdfunding network study, the Somobilitat cooperative, which is a electric car sharing cooperative, which has basically provided cars for health workers with mobilization, with mobility issues. I'd like also to talk about, of course, it's not all these impactful projects are not only rising on crowdfunding platforms; they also have self-organized. And talking about one of the most, impactful project that's basically from Catalonia, the Basque Country, and all over Spain. This is Som Energia. So it's a growing environmental awareness happening. So Som Energia raised like almost 5 million in a week in March 2020. So a few days before the lockdown. That's pretty interesting to see when we talk about sustainable finance. But I think we need to look beyond crowdfunding and financing. So I'd like to invite you, just because we also have a strong involvement in developing and helping local governments in developing strategies of citizen engagement, we have to look at digital democracy and citizen participation platforms and how they stimulate also deliberative democracy on all the issues that are, on the table after the post-COVID situation. I mean, after the post-lockdown, because COVID is still around. But basically, I'd like also to invite you I'm sharing with you a framework we're working on with different platforms, which is basically how can we call that phenomenon when all these activisms and all these citizen engagement is happening in different platforms. And probably people like, as I am, I will probably back a project on one day, and the same day I will just sign an online petition. So basically, we need to look at all these user experience, looking at citizen engagement and how this really proves by data, having data and compare data, how the citizens' influence in public life is growing. and their involvement. So we're basically jumping from awareness to engagement to empowerment when we back a project with social impact, with creating crowdvocacy. Some of the projects we've been funding have really the power to basically bridging political participation, digital campaigning platforms, and civic crowdfunding. So it's pretty clear now that civic crowdfunding is a powerful instrument for public participation and policy innovation. We've seen that. We've seen that in various papers of the ECN networks. I like to, bring your attention to it. It's a lot to read there on triggering participation. So it's a collection of civic crowdfunding and match funding experiences. But I do come back to the idea that research opens the way to study crowdfunding as a powerhouse of social change. So that's also, and Oliver knows about this because he's one of the editor of this book, which is almost ready to launch, which is called Crowd Asset Crowdfunding for Policymakers, where we also write a chapter on match fundings and how the experience of Goteo can influence new policies for crowdvocacy, as we call it. But basically, I'd like to come back to the paper I was mentioning at the beginning in the Nature Research Journal.
Olivier,
yes.
you have about 5 minutes. Yeah.
Okay, cool.
We have a very strict director here, which will cut you off.
I know, it's fine with me.
You met him.
So basically, the Demons Research Group and the Goteo Foundation, we've laid the foundations, I guess, also for all the platform for studying the phenomenon of crowdfunding with scientific rigor and based on open data. So it's published on open access. And this is basically how we had to face the issue. I mentioned that the SDGs came up in 2015. So what about all these data that have been generated that are linked to SDGs, what were produced before on the platform? So we invite you to look at the framework we came in with. And basically what we try to do is to translation of, or at least creating a dialogue through data between policymakers and possible investors, also impact investors, backers, and initiatives. So we basically talk about we have creating this automatic coding. So before SDGs in Goteo, we were using what we call social commitment. So a project needs to have a clear social commitment to be published. So we can talk about like a commitment could be strengthening democratic values, could be like climate action. And basically we've reorganized all these social commitments into the SDG framework and refine the specific relationship with of the project with one or more of the SDGs. So we did this data automatic reclassification, and then we've been studying each of these almost 500 projects, and we came back and see what the derivation were from the data model we had created. And basically we came up with a simplification of all these SDG frameworks so citizens can understand clearly what we're talking about. So we basically have thought that everybody knows about the ecological footprint. So that's basically why this is one of the main, footprints we use to reorganize the SDGs. And the social footprint, of course, is very important. And there's this democratic footprint, which is, I guess we need to re-look at it with quite interest, basically looking at democratization of financing too. So basically that's so important. My message is here, and we invite all the platforms which have been intervening and a platform from the ECN network. We need to work together on open data. So I think Goteo represents a unique approach to data transparency, and I think allowing a public scrutiny of the main funding dynamics. So we have so many information on campaigns, backer behaviors, and I think that's the world we need to deal with. So knowing a little bit better who's behind this project. So I'm just finishing by letting you know about this project, which is amazing, talking about Black Lives Matter. So this is the project from the Popular Labor Union of Street Vendors in Barcelona, which has basically illegal people who have created a legal brand. And it's so interesting to see how they have integrated all these ethical, social, and solidarity values from the social and solidarity economy. They're based in Barcelona, but most importantly, they have received all this attention by really reclaiming the rights of being social entrepreneurs. And I think it's a breakthrough for the normalization and integration of migrant community within the city of Barcelona, and a nice example. And they've been the first one on the front line in COVID situation to create all these masks, so reusing their workshops to do that. Interestingly enough, and that's the last part, if you look in details on the impact of that project, you would clearly see also a new, kind of an accurate, more accurate way of measuring the impact and the relation of this type of project with SDGs. So they have already integrated, and they also have their own indicators. So social market is one, human rights is another one, using organic textiles, fair trade, local commerce. It's all there, and I think it's just beautiful.
Thank you very much, Olivier. I mean, that was a very big amount of data for us to now digest, but I think your approach is absolutely fantastic, and it fits so super good into the discussion we had the days before about the ESGs and the sustainable development, and the discussion we will have this afternoon in the panel about how can you actually measure the impact, and what should the platforms be doing, and what should others be doing. So
it's a wonderful piece of energy to start this day and,
wonderful.
and get energized to think about what's coming next.
Absolutely, and great marketing for the ECN as well. Thank you very much for that.
You're welcome.
We will be in touch and see what we can do together on open data. But it's time for us now to say goodbye to you. Olivier, thank you very much.
Thanks a lot. Merci.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Have a nice day.
You too. Very good. So that was impactful and really full of data. So with this kind of energy, let's move on to our first keynote of the day. And for our first keynote, we should have Daniel Farshi from the European Investment Bank in the line, and we'll see if he's there. Daniel, can you hear us?
Like he is.
Yes, I can. Thanks.
Very good. We can hear you yes, as if you would be in the room. So that is fantastic.
Excellent.
So Daniel, we're really happy to have you here. We had your colleague from the EIF yesterday here. She probably touched some points that you may mention again, but I would like you to kind of take your time and explain us a little bit what the EIB is planning with regard to sustainable finance, and also potentially what you're doing or planning or hoping to be able to do with regard to crowdfunding and sustainable finance. We might like to interrupt you and ask some questions. Okay, so he disconnected. So Daniel disconnected for the moment. Technical problems. We will have him back in a minute. What did you think of Olivier's introduction? I mean, this approach to open data and the analysis of the work they do.
No, I think it's very interesting, because I think that one of the things that's needed in the space, particularly as the space expands, is to frankly be able to talk to institutions which tend to be skeptical without data, or doubt without data, and diligence is important, and to have it. And the fact that he's already anticipated this and is going through this with rigor, I think is really, really important and potentially very valuable.
Yeah, I think so as well. So Daniel should be back. Daniel?
Yes.
Sorry, we lost you for a second. So let's...
No, it all froze up on me, but can you hear me now?
Yes,
Quite well.
Again, as if you're with us. So let's not challenge our luck. We hand over to you. Give us, please, the opportunity to interrupt you every now and then it's a bit easier for you and for our viewers and us as well. Because we have to turn our head and get a stiff neck when we sit like this.
Yes, and I'm flitting between two screens, so if it looks like I'm not looking at the camera, please forgive me. Anyway, I intended to keep this fairly short, as experience to date has been that online events benefit from keeping it short. So please do interrupt. I think it'll be more interesting with some questions. I kind of, thinking about what to present to you today, I've divided it into two parts, roughly. So I was going to first introduce a little bit the EIB for anybody who's not familiar with it, and some of the things we do and the products we offer and so on. And then in the second place, move to just more talking about our work in the evolving space of the EU thinking on green, on sustainability, and how that works with the financial system. I thought it might be an interesting topic.
Absolutely. So
if I can work out how to advance my slides. Okay, so to first talk about the European Investment Bank. Just a very quick overview. We're a policy-driven institution. We're actually the largest. We haven't historically necessarily been the most high profile, but actually in terms of numbers, we're the largest multilateral lender and borrower in the world. And we're owned by our shareholders, which are the 27 member states of the European Union. And we're based here in Luxembourg, which is where I'm speaking to you from. We're the parent of the European Investment Fund, which I suppose may be slightly more familiar in some ways to much of the audience. And I think you've already heard from and maybe hearing from again. We sit as the parent organization of the EIF. And we're the agency tasked with implementing the Juncker Plan, or the European Fund for Strategic Investments, which is a huge commission-led effort to get a lot more funding into the European economy. And if you see the chart on the top right-hand side of your screen, that second big bump is as we were implementing that. If you could bring it up to date, you'd see there was another that would continue to go up as we're doing some pretty significant efforts as part of the COVID recovery plan, and so that keeps going up and to the right. So just in terms of numbers, EIB last year 2019 lent around just over 60 billion within the EU. So I say lent, I really mean invest, because it also includes some equity. But 60 billion of financing inside the EU and about just under 9 outside of the EU. So outside of the EU for us is a relatively smaller part of our total portfolio. But that said, because of the scale of the EIB, it still puts us as one of the largest, or at times the largest, sort of financial institution, or MDB, operating in emerging markets. There's a breakdown there, which I think I'll skip over. So what are the areas we really focus on? We focus on environment, and we lent about 16 billion in environment last year. Infrastructure, again, a similar figure. Innovation, just under around 14 billion. And support to SMEs, which is as you can see, is very big. It's 25 billion last year. And this results in we have a whole slew of impact metrics, but let's say a couple of key ones. We provided power for about 7.5 million households from renewable energy last year. Over 500,000 family in affordable and social housing financed by EIB. 12 million served by improved healthcare access. Safer drinking water for around 10 million. Obviously, that's mostly our work outside of the EU. And around 4.5 million jobs created in small businesses through our actions. EIB has quite a wide suite of products, and this chart doesn't capture it all, but it sort of captures the buckets, I guess. So let's say our main bread and butter work is with investment grade lending. We have a AAA rating, which we must closely guard in order to be able to have access to the funding at a cost which we're then able to pass on, favorable cost which we're then able to pass on to our borrowers. So we very jealously guard our credit rating, and so by implication we lend to a lot of investment grade areas. So that's primarily public sector financing. So that's working with municipalities, sub-sovereign agencies, all those kind of areas. Project finance, large project finance. So you can think things like bridges. We used to finance a lot of airports. I think exactly how that's Paris aligned is something we're looking at the moment, but these big infrastructure projects. Intermediated loans as you saw in the earlier slide, is a huge part of our portfolio, working through banks all over the European Union and outside to make sure liquidity gets to SMEs and smaller companies. And then we have a bucket of special activities, which is where we take a bit more risk. Sometimes this is on our own balance sheet, and often this is with support from the Commission or from other donors to kind of relieve some of the stress that would cause on our balance sheet. So project finance, where we take project risk, you can think of something like renewable energy projects where there's merchant risk or this type of thing. Equity through funds, which is actually where I sit in the organization. So we have big investment in funds, private equity, infrastructure funds, micro lending, mostly outside of the EU, VC, all kinds of other areas like that. And then we have risk sharing, which is really where we're working with our partner financial institutions to take some of the risk of a portfolio of assets away from them so that they can increase their lending primarily to SMEs.
Daniel, if I may, you have your own balance sheet. You're an independent organization. You have your owners, but you also manage some funds you mentioned there on behalf of other donors or the European Commission. Can you say a bit about the split? I mean, how much are you independent in your decisions, and how much do you have to listen out for the guidance of your owners or the Commission or so?
Yeah, well, we have, let's say, ultimately, we are responsible to our board, which has representatives from the Commission and from our member states, and they're the ultimate rule-setting, approval body within the organization. So we are very much, in the end, guided by and driven by our shareholders and our stakeholders.
Okay, so they would approve your strategic plans and your investment focus, and then you act out on that.
Correct. Actually, they also approve our transactions.
Okay. Very good. Yeah, thank you.
For the most part, there's some limited delegation, but they're very much involved in a hands-on way. Where we're operating, so that applies even for our own balance sheet. Where we're operating with, for example, under the FC, the European Strategic, I always get the name mixed up, but the Juncker Plan. We're directly taking risk, sort of a guarantee from the Commission, and we work very closely with them then in establishing what are the priorities, how do we measure our impacts, sort of a jointly agreed reporting, and so on. I don't know if you can. Okay, I haven't frozen again.
No, you were just.
I'll take the lull as a license to continue. Then.
Yes,
you're fine.
So I also thought I'd mention just again, I sit within the part of the bank that looks at equity investment into funds, and I thought I'd just present one example of something we did recently, which I think it's not directly crowdfunding, but it's debt, and I think it's sort of innovative and could be interesting. Maybe just to give an idea of the kind of thing that can be thought of. So we worked with a French, we signed summer last year, around this time last year actually, although the fund closed towards the end of the year. We worked with a French asset management company called Amundi to put together a green debt fund. And the rationale for this, the motivation, if you like, was that Europe is actually really ahead in the sense of green bonds, right? Europe has more green bonds per unit of GDP, if you like, than anywhere else in the world. But if you really break that down, it's quite narrow. So it's a lot of sovereign, sub-sovereign, and agency issuances. It's a lot of investment grade issuers, primarily large utilities and large financial institutions. And there's not that much else. And if you compare that to the US, which maybe isn't as big on the headline numbers, but it's got more diversity. You've got more asset-backed securities. You've got more mortgage-backed securities. I mean, Fannie Mae being a huge issuer. You've got more sub-investment grade issuances of green bonds. So the thinking was, how could we start to try and bring that to Europe a bit? And furthermore, if you look at, let's say, these other pots of issuers, they are the biggest part of the whole capital markets landscape, and yet they're really not very active in green. They're making up, single digits and low single digits of the total green bond issuances in the European market. So, how could we try to change that dynamic a bit and bring more green issuers to the table? So. The fund is the first tranche closed at 260 odd million. The aim is to get to 100 million. We're right now working on looking at a potential second tranche. The aim is to get to 1 billion. And it would really be a source of demand that could pull in these investors. So it allows investment banks to go to their clients and say, look, we have a ready market for your issuance if you issue green. Come issue green with us, we'll help you through the process, and we know we can already, we have a source of demand. And our impact there, our additionality, if you like, is both creating this source of demand to attract new players to the market, but also then we get to set the standards, if you like, and say, okay, but we're going to make sure that this is really reaching the best standards in terms of ESG, in terms of how you measure climate impacts and these kind of things. So it's early days for this fund. I would say it had just a few months of time to start investment before COVID hit, and so it's been an interesting few months. But the debt markets basically froze, but they're coming back to life now, and things are going in a positive direction.
So I assume you haven't transacted in that fund yet, I assume.
There's been some very early initial transactions.
Okay.
Yeah. I won't risk. I'm not sure how much is confidential, so I won't go too far. But there have been some transactions. And then, the second part I wanted to get to really was just looking at, because I thought this might be interesting for your audience, to look at the emerging. Hopefully, I'm not going over what you heard from DG FISMA and European Parliament and so on. But look a bit from an investor's perspective, what this sort of emerging sustainable finance landscape in the EU looks like. So a little bit of the overview. Just over a year ago, we had the Commission formed a high-level expert group on sustainable finance to come up with some recommendations. They produced an initial report, and on the back of which was formed this technical expert group, the TEG.
Martin went through this on Wednesday quite in detail, so you don't have to spend too much time, but maybe recap it quickly. That would maybe.
Okay. Yeah, sorry. That's
it's okay. Don't worry.
The trouble of doing things remotely is I missed the context. Okay, so I'll get to the nub of what I want to talk about. Really is what's the advantage this brings from an investor's perspective, and what are the impacts on asset managers and so on. I mean, I think from an investor's perspective, the key about this is that it creates a common language, right? So at the moment, you've got umpteen different, every fund product or investment product I see says something about being sustainable or sustainable principles. What that means is often different to every person who's writing it. It may be fairly meaningless, vacuous statement. It may be genuine. It requires a lot of work to tell. And we're lucky at the EIB. We have experts. We have a whole team of engineers to go in detail, kick the tires, see what it means, understand if it's really doing what it says on the tin. But that's not an atmosphere which is conducive to really bringing in more mainstream asset managers into the space. So that's the aim, and that's where this can really help. So I mean, the two key points which I wanted to get to, and please cut me off when I start saying stuff that's already been said, is the taxonomy and the green bond standard. I'll skip the rest of this slide then. Taxonomy, I guess you have heard about already and has maybe been explained. I will try. Will you guide me as to when I'm repeating what you've heard?
Just go ahead. Yes, I mean I think it doesn't hurt if we hear it twice, but maybe don't linger too long on it. I think what the audience is interested in is what the EIB is going to do with this and how it is being applicable.
Yes.
And how they can benefit from it. That's okay.
Yeah. So I mean, we've been very much involved in the whole formulation of this. So this is kind of. It comes, if you like, from many of our ways of doing things, and we're integrating it very much into, let's say, where there are differences, we're then working on integrating them very much into how we do things. I've talked a little bit about the point here. The taxonomy really looks at these 6 environmental objectives on the right-hand side: climate change, adaptation, mitigation, marine resources, circular economy, pollution prevention, and biodiversity and ecosystems. And it says you need to be in one of those areas. You need to do no significant harm. So again, you've probably heard about this, but you don't want to build a wind farm, which is great, in somewhere where you're trashing the local marine ecosystem, which is obviously not so good. So it needs to be consistent internally, and then it needs to meet minimum safeguards and criteria, which is technical criteria, which is typically sort of emissions, how much emissions per unit of productive power, work, whatever an investment is creating, and that very much aligns with how EIB has been doing things for many years. It covers the sectors you can see on the left. Again, if you've heard about them already, I'm going to steer relatively clear of them. I do think it's worth emphasizing that it's not just the actual emission abating or mitigating activity itself, or adaptive activity itself, but it's all of the chain that inputs into that. So the factory that makes the gearboxes for the wind turbine, this kind of thing. That's also included. Now, this is maybe where I'll linger a little bit more. This is really looking, and because I think this is where it starts to hit investors and asset managers. The way this is going, the taxonomy is going to work is that depending on the type of fund, depending on the type of financial product, you're going to have different disclosure levels. So for a fund that's really, or for any kind of fund product or financial product that's going out there and marketing itself as really being in the market for environmental sustainability, you know, a circular economy fund or this kind of thing, then really they are going to be obliged to disclose against the taxonomy. So follow the taxonomy through the chain from the projects to the end, and say how much of the taxonomy is aligned. And there's a thing on the right hand of your screen which shows how that would be done. It's not rocket science. It's basically just taking a kind of weighted average of the taxonomy alignment of each stage. So you aggregate data as you go up. Then for funds that are promoting environmental, this is one of the interesting areas. So funds that, or for products that say they're sustainable, or say, then they really are going to have a decision. You know, is this how we're going to market ourselves? And if so, we have to comply with it, disclose against the taxonomy. And if not, you're going to have to basically back off those claims, or explain why you're not complying with the taxonomy. And then for other funds that are just generic, they're going to basically have to carry a disclaimer that they're not checking themselves against the taxonomy. So it really starts to bring differentiation.
I have a question here, Martin. I don't know if you heard Olivier speak before you. He runs a crowdfunding platform in Spain. It's mostly reward-based crowdfunding, so it's not your type of business now. But they've developed their own methodology, you know, roughly at the same time than you did it, based on the SDGs, so the Sustainable Development Goals. Yep. Now, assume somebody does this, they would have to change the complete model in order to apply here. How much of the SDGs can we find back in your taxonomy? And is it easy for somebody who already applies to these rules to now swap to the new taxonomy?
It's a good question. I could back up a little bit and say, so the EIB was actually the first issuer of green bonds at all in the market in 2007. And EIB then has taken a very a rather conservative approach to our green bonds, in that they're really only used to finance renewable energy or energy efficiency, which is obviously a very limited subset of the total universe of sustainable financing. We also issued last year a sustainability bond, which is more kind of is seeking to align with the SDGs. But again, there we're taking quite conservative approach. It's relatively limited. It's sort of water access, sanitation, these kind of areas. It's not that wide. We have such a big portfolio, and if you like, that we can be conservative and still find enough volume to go to the market. The taxonomy will overlap with some areas of some of the SDGs. I don't remember them all off by heart, but certainly sort of mitigation, pollution, mitigation of greenhouse gases, pollution, biodiversity. I mean, they're all in there. It won't overlap. There's not a full overlap with everything, because in the end, the SDGs target a much wider array of aims. And in fact, some of the SDGs are so broad that this is a very personal view, but they're so broad that it becomes quite hard to really, some of them you can quite specifically assess against. Some of them are so broad that it's very hard to distinguish economic activity from something that then promotes at least some parts of the SDGs. So I don't think there'll be full compatibility with the taxonomy. Will somebody have to come and swap it out? I guess it depends. I mean, right now, and this is where I'm coming to, this is not going to apply for this kind of product, right? This is really, at the moment, it's targeting things like pension funds, things like life insurance products, mutual funds, this type of thing. It's really going for the very big institutional investors, and they will have to start disclosing this sort of stuff. It's nowhere near, I think, even yeah. I mean, this is a bit the point. It's not yet targeting bank lending will be voluntary. The whole loan market is still voluntary, and certainly crowdfunding. It's not. There's no obligations there yet. Is this a bit the direction? But I think that the thing that's interesting for me is that this seems to be the direction of travel. So I think there will come a time when all financial investment managers have to start thinking about how they can assess against the taxonomy. The taxonomy is designed to be evolving. I mean, honestly, it does miss that. It self-admits that it's missing bits right now. It's very hard, for example, to look when you look at working capital to assess whether that can comply with the taxonomy. Frankly, not so much at the moment. So it will evolve over time. And so at the same time that these obligations start to become applied to a broader audience, I imagine that the taxonomy will probably be a more encompassing structure as well. I think probably, though, you can have, SDG, so certainly social bonds and green bonds are running as two parallel concepts right now. And so I would imagine the sort of sustainability green reporting, which the taxonomy is really aiming to capture, and broader SDG reporting will also be effectively parallel right now with some overlap.
Yeah, I mean, here on your slide, you have you phrase it like will likely, or some will have to disclose. At what level of intermediary do you expect now or in the near future to have contractual conditions referring to the taxonomy when you deal with financial intermediaries? I mean, well,
if I think back to a few slides before, I mean, right now, as I say, it's the very largest, asset managers and pension funds and so on that will have to disclose. Right now, what they're having to disclose is how much of their portfolio complies with it. They will have to disclose how much of their portfolio complies with the taxonomy. A green bond standard, for example, is going to be mostly voluntary, but I think the regulation side, in some sense, maybe start to become not the driver. I mean, creating the framework is very important, and that is part of the Commission's work. But then forcing everybody to use it may not be that germane in the end. The thing is, investors are going to start looking. I mean, there's huge pressure from investors to increase their sustainability activity, their sustainability lending or investment. I mean, us too, right? We've made commitments now that we're going to get to, within the next few years, to 50% of our lending will be climate action. It's a big step for us, and I can tell you that the pressure on us all within the organization to find ways that we can do more sustainable lending is huge, and that's not just us. I mean, I think EIB may be slightly ahead of. It's kind of our role to be slightly ahead of the curve on that. But honestly, I speak to a lot of banks, to a lot of other asset managers, and they're all feeling this pressure, and so. The driver, if in my mind, is going to come more from that. If you want access to investment, it's going to be a lot easier, and there's going to be a big pressure to be able to demonstrate that you're sustainable.
I think it's
and then how's the easiest way to do that, at least within the European Union, is going to be with reference to one of their standards being developed.
It's interesting. It's interesting to see this, and I think the direction you're discussing makes sense. My concern is going to be that the consulting process, if you will, that occurs in the next year and a half, really needs to really fully engage organizations like ECN to make sure that as we get into the crowdfunding situation, that there's a clear ability to basically link some of the standards in a way that not only the crowdfunding platforms can understand, but also that the individual investors can understand how this is going to be applied. Yeah,
I mean, the I'm on the investment side, so I haven't been too closely involved in the actual formulation, but there has been quite an extensive process of outreach during the formation of the taxonomy, and it's ongoing, I think, for some of the other sub-processes. So there's the opportunity to contribute there, and many different players from all over the financial space have made contributions. And so I would absolutely encourage ECN to be part of that. And if you have any questions as to how to connect there, of course I can find invite you to let me know and find the right connection.
Yeah, very good. Thanks. If you want to move on, we have 15 minutes.
We've gone through it all rather quickly because I realized that you've already had quite a lot of it explained, so I didn't want to go into too much detail. I mean, I could stop briefly on this. I could just stop briefly on the European Green Bond Standard, just because I think that's interesting. It's kind of how this is applying to a specific financial product. So far it's just recommendations. The European Green Bond Standard is still not in as final a form as the taxonomy, although even the taxonomy, I should say, is still going through the legislative process. But so the recommendations are that it be voluntary, as I said. I think that's going to be voluntary from a regulatory standpoint, but it will be hard to justify beyond a certain point to be issuing a green bond which doesn't comply to this within the EU. And I also think that this, to some extent, this is the most comprehensive standard there is on green bonds so far, and is likely to be adapted and replicated in other places. Yeah, there are four key components here. One is the taxonomy, which we've discussed. You need to be able to track. This is standard for existing green bond frameworks, but I think this is core for any kind of asset type. You need to be able to track the use of proceeds. So you need from day one a very clear system in place to work out how you track each dollar or euro coming in and where that goes. And so that you can say very clearly in reporting, this is where you investor, this is where your money went. Then you need a good system in place for reporting. You need to report, again, on those use of proceeds. You need to report what were the impacts and to the extent possible, with quantitative impacts. How many, I mean, the standard one, which is already really common is emissions, equivalent tons of CO2 saved, but there are lots of others that are possible, given the sector coverage we discussed earlier. And then here's, in some senses, the new thing about the European Green Bond Standard compared to, well, I guess so is the taxonomy, but is this concept of having accredited verifiers. So we've had green bond principles already have the recommendation of a third-party verification, but in the EU Green Bond Standard, the proposal is to have a necessary verification to confirm that all of this has been done properly and to confirm that the reporting framework is correct and so on. So it's a bit like a kind of audit function. And those third-party verifiers will be accredited according to standards contained within the regulation. Yeah, and there's also some suggestions in there of potentially, suggesting that the European central banks preferentially purchase green bonds versus standard bonds, or that financial incentives be offered. I think all of those are kind of relatively early stage discussions at this point. So, but again, if they come to pass, it could have a big impact on the market. So I just, for me, this is kind of indicative of where how you take a given financial product and start to try and differentiate what's really green from the rest. And I think no matter what financial product you're working with, this could be an interesting indication of where things can start to move.
Yeah. Do we have performance data on green bonds versus, or EU green bonds versus other bonds? I mean, I know that from the impact investment side, we have portfolios that at least have the same performance or even outperform standard portfolios. But do we have this for the bond market here?
It's a really good question, and it's the question which everybody asks whenever you discuss green bonds. The thing about green bonds is, unless you're talking securitizations, which are relatively thin on the ground in the green space right now, in the end, you're taking corporate risk. So if you have a green bond issued if you have one of our climate action bonds, which is what we call our green bonds, or you have one of our non-climate action bonds, you're taking exactly the same risk. And that means that there's no particular performance difference, if you like. And typically there's no real risk premia associated on either side. In the end, the pricing is the same. There's kind of evidence that the margin for what data there is from sort of benchmark-sized green bond issuances that there's a little more stickiness. Investors tend to stay with them longer, so they're traded less often because I think investors want to keep them in their portfolio. There's some evidence that secondary pricing might be slightly high, but these are kind of the very, very small changes at the margin. I mean, in the end, the biggest difference you commonly hear reported is that issuers who do go to the bond market with a green issuance say that they have a very significant oversubscription. So they're versus their normal issuance, that many more investors clamoring for access to that issuance. And it has some advantages inherently, because if you're an issuer of a green bond, or of an issuer of a bond anyway, you'd like to diversify your investors, because obviously you're diversifying risk. You're often diversifying, in this case, into longer term, more quote unquote sticky investors who are more in it for the impact, and that's good. In theory, it should also have an impact on the price at which you can issue debt. I think the market just perhaps isn't quite ready for that yet. And what tends to happen is, yes, everybody wants to get access to the issuance, but then they also want to pay, the EIB pricing, for example, or the name your bank here pricing, or the name your utility here pricing. And so that there's not yet been that big pricing differential, which in an ideal world would work as a steer to issuers.
Okay, very interesting. Thank you very much. I think we can maybe even take this 4 components you have here to work on a EU green crowdfunding standard based on the taxonomy with our platforms. It will take some time, I think, before this reaches down to the crowdfunding market anyway. We heard from the EIF that they now implement the ESGs, of course, and the taxonomy is important, but that they also have certain activities on crowdfunding within the impact and sustainable finance space. I know that the EIB is involved in some crowd lending or peer-to-peer lending platforms. What is the chance that you will expand your activity and maybe even add, the taxonomy or some sustainability issues to EIB funding to crowdfunding platforms?
I mean, so yes, we have. As far as I'm aware, it was a team that sits was down the corridor from me, and so I'm a little bit familiar with the work they did. So far, as I think you're pointing out, it's not been focused on sustainability. It was more, as I illustrated in one of the very early slides, financing to small companies and small enterprises is also a high priority. So that was more with that in mind. I think there would be a hugely ready audience in EIB to look at doing additional work if this could be aligned with the taxonomy and with sustainability. I mean, that would be an absolute no-brainer for us, which would be extremely interesting. There's a bit of a chicken and egg problem. We can't come in to finance something if the framework doesn't exist and if the market doesn't exist yet. But I think that would be, I could say that would be very, very interesting and something that probably we should be looking at.
Yeah. Because I understand that the ESGs are now applicable to all your activities. So if you want even your SME activities have a focus on sustainability, so this could be an incentive for our market to actually include sustainability in just any type of activity. Yeah.
Absolutely. Look, I mean, there are two. Let's say there are two levels for us. you have what we're calling the Paris alignment. I mean, we're not calling what's known as Paris alignment, and now we're saying that everything we do has to be Paris aligned. So we always had everything we do always had to be comply with ESG standards. So there's no change there. From now on, everything has to be Paris aligned, and that means that we can no longer be doing a lot of. We have our recently published our revised energy lending guidelines, energy lending policy, where we have basically said we're out of fossil fuels now in the vast majority of cases. ESG was always that hasn't changed, but this energy lending policy has upped our game, and we're now saying everything has to be Paris aligned. And so that's not quite the same as saying it's necessarily green. It can't be going in the wrong direction. Let's put it that way. But being actually a sustainable product or a green product is the next step up. It's further along the sort of ambition scale, and so yes, anything that's done with us we'll have to seriously think about. We'll have to demonstrate how it's Paris aligned. But furthermore, if you can go one step further and develop a product that's peer-to-peer crowdfunding, but specifically green, I think that's going to be really pioneering and something which the EIB would really be a great partner in working towards.
Yeah, they could provide a whole different deployment route for capital. That would be very, very interesting. I think you're right.
Yep, I fully agree. That was a bit where I was trying to get to with the presentation.
Where you arrived.
I guess one of the questions would be, of course, this scale at which you could, if you will, drop down to be able to actually make capital available and allocations that crowdfunding structures and organizations could enter into with you, given you usually have a pretty high floor from the perspective of the average crowdfunding structure at the moment, anyways.
Yeah. I mean, we do. We're a very big organization, and so things have to be kind of aggregated to a level where it's straightforward for us to participate. I would say within the department in which I sit, as I say, we're investing mostly equity, and so it is often at much smaller levels. On the lending side, we do tend to have fairly high tickets. And in fact, I think our work with crowdfunding so far has been it's been within my department, and so it's been more kind of at that equity level. I think it's not straightforward, and that's I pointed to one of the challenges with the taxonomy is that you have to. It's very much designed around a projects framework, and so the challenge is a bit how you then apply that to areas of the economy which aren't projects. And as we know, a lot of the economy, maybe the majority of the economy, is not projects. And so you need to. I would say that's still a work in progress. To be fair.
Well, interesting
how
challenge.
Do you account for green? Yeah.
Interesting challenge and opportunity for ECN, I think.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. I think this is. I mean, we understand it's fairly high level right now, but I think there's great opportunities for the industry also to develop things. I think we have a panelist today as well later on. There is discussions, and there are in existence as well. Let's say a type of fund of funds for crowdfunding. So AFM regulated entities that collect funds and then invest or co-invest alongside the crowd. And I think this could potentially be, maybe not today, but in going forward, a model to disperse funds from you across a sector and diversify the allocation.
With a significant enough structure and size.
Yes. And the market needs to be able to do this. But yeah, I think that could be something. We need to see how that develops. Mm-hmm. Do you have any last words for us? Some advice to our industry in how they should move ahead?
Yeah, no, I mean, I'll just emphasize the point already, which is that right now everybody's focused on responses to COVID-19 and the kind of immediate economic recovery, but this sustainability, the priority of sustainability and climate, it's not going away. it's probably going to come back with even more force as part of once the sort of European Green Deal gets, let's say, some of the force behind the need to get capital out there. I think we'll meet the European Green Deal, and you're really going to start to see. We're already seeing, and I think everywhere there's going to start to be just huge pressure to assess alignment with climate priorities, with environmental necessities. And I doubt any part of the financial world is going to escape that. So I think the important thing is at this point is to start realizing that, and to start at the extreme working out how you can benefit from it by being able to offer a product which targets this need, and at the other extreme, at the very least, work out how not to find yourself in a situation where you're unable to at least kind of speak to the Paris alignment of what you're doing, and be able to at least say, we're compatible with the sort of minimum de minimis standards that everybody's setting. So I think kind of it's not going to be possible for very much longer to simply say, oh, we're doing this other product. It's got nothing to do with climate or sustainability. Yeah. I really think that's coming as a priority for everybody, and everybody will start to need to be required.
We're having a paradigm shift in policy and also in the application.
Absolutely.
Daniel, thank you very much. This was super interesting.
Indeed.
I hope that our listeners and viewers today and in the coming days will take their lesson and start enacting some of these things and look at them more closely. Thank you very much. We have to move on.
Thank you.
Thanks again to Luxembourg.
Thank you very much for having me.
Take care.
And so that was a great intervention. We're now going on to our second keynote speaker, also calling in from Luxembourg and discussing a bit the actual implication of impact investing.
And there he is.
Arnaud, can you hear us?
Hello, very well.
Very well. Hello.
Good afternoon. Great. Do you hear me?
Yes, we hear you well. We hear you well. Were you able to follow your colleague from Luxembourg on the discussion?
Yeah, definitely. I'm with you since the start of the afternoon. So I didn't miss any word.
Very good.
And obviously we know each other because we collaborate very closely with the EIB, and so definitely supporting all what he said, and which I like in a way because it will be relatively complementary to the various aspects that we'll be touching upon, which go more into the impact investing now.
Yeah, and you are basically right at the heart of his topic and implementing some of these things already. And let's say on a level maybe that comes a little bit closer to the crowdfunding sector where we can take some lessons away and maybe benefit from this. So we are excited to hear from you. And I think we leave the floor to you, and we see if we interrupt you and if you have questions from the audience. Yeah, and then we interrupt and have a chat. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, first, thank you very much, Oliver, and the crowdfunding network for having impact at your conference. We have 45 minutes. I'll try to touch upon the various aspects that we do, but quite try to be as short as possible on what we do and dive into how can we connect basically what we do in day out in impact investing with this beautiful and very powerful tool, which is actually crowdfunding. And as you mentioned, we discussed already years ago, 7 years, 10 years ago, and we already tried to explore it at the time. How can we use this, means for investors to reach out to impactful projects and to give them access to a different way than through investment funds, through investment banks. At the time, as you said, and I think, well, I'm not a specialist, but I guess it's still kind of a challenge on the regulatory side. But I think things are going into the right direction. And we see popping up a lot of impact investing platforms, traditional platforms that are doing impact investing or fully dedicated impact investing crowdfunding platform. So it's really good in the sense that it makes our lives a bit easier, at least in our company Impact, and I'll explain you why. But that's what we really like to see, seeing as many different channels possible to actually channel the money coming from the investors to the actual impactful projects on the ground. So let me start after this first slide on a very dense slide. I don't know if you see this first slide.
We can see it, but it's quite busy.
It is, indeed.
Yeah, it's quite busy. I agree. I tried to summarize everything in one slide, or what we've done over the last 13 years. So obviously, don't read the text. I'll go through it very quickly. I mean, in 5 minutes, and I'll try to be short. And usually, I manage to be in these 5 minutes. Impact. We are based in Luxembourg. Mainly, our aim and our mission is to actually accompany fund initiators, or let's say impact investment structures initiators, in the whole journey to their first concept to actually the closing of the fund. So we really accompany them through all the different steps. So there are legal aspects, there are financial aspects, there are impact strategy aspect, impact reporting aspects, a lot of different things that you know when you also set up your crowdfunding platforms that you need to tackle when you actually design and you want to structure an impact fund. And that's what we've been doing for the last 13 years, initially for development banks such as the EIB, such as the German development bank KfW, the World Bank IFC, and then gradually working with other actors like not-for-profits, relatively large ones in the conservation area, like Conservation International, which is in a way in the same league as WWF, the Nature Conservancy in the US, but also quite specialized investment advisors that are on the ground themselves, very specialized and expert in the investment into impactful projects. Emerging markets mainly, but also in Europe. So we talk about entities that are investing in through microfinance institution, in renewable energy, in education, in biodiversity, in forestry. Basically, we're not a specialist of a specific investment theme in impact investing, but more of the process you need to follow when you actually want to structure, hopefully, a successful and impactful, actually, impact funds. So we've worked with investment managers, like you may know the names of Triodos, which is well known in the Netherlands, in Belgium, and starting in the UK and Spain, etc. But we've worked with less known but very niche more players, which are becoming quite big in billions of dollars of assets under management, such as the Swiss entities like Responsibility and Blue Orchard. And over 13 years, we've set up the equivalent of 25 funds, as I mentioned, investing in a whole range of different investment themes, including also SME finance and technology and all these aspects. So we're a team of 35 people based in Luxembourg. Mainly, we have two lucky guys in Mauritius, because as you may know, Mauritius is the hub for let's say financial investments into Africa, and as you will see, and as you've guessed also, a big chunk of the impact investing is going towards African projects. So that's why we've been also supporting entities to set up funds in Mauritius, who does have the expertise to actually invest into these emerging and sometimes not that easy countries from a financial point of view. Our aim is to really, let's say, support the emergence of a more, let's say, diverse and more professional ecosystem in impact investing. So we call ourselves, let's say, enablers of the impact ecosystem in general, and we like to build the ecosystem, we like to help to build. So we like to really take by the hand very first time fund manager who are launching their first fund to teach them what we've learned over the 13 years, the best practices in terms of financial, legal, and governance structuring, but also, and even more importantly, on the impact strategy and the impact measurement, management, and all these aspects that Daniel already touched upon. But as you may guess already, these days are becoming even more important. It's no longer possible to say, I'm a microfinance fund, so I do good, and I have my impact. Now you have to have a proper methodology to say the way I would invest would actually contribute to reaching a certain impact target, and I will put everything in place to increase my chance to actually reach these positive social and environmental targets. So that's what we've been doing, and that we continue to do. So not only we help in the setup of these funds, but we help about a dozen to 15 funds also in the management of their entities. We were not picking the right projects on the ground, but there's a whole bunch of other aspects that you need to tackle when you manage a fund, including risk management, compliance, let's say impact reporting, et cetera, et cetera. And so that's what we tend to provide as services. And more, so we help investors looking at opportunities to invest into impact investment funds. So basically, that's the summary of this very dense slide. So we've set up small funds, very tiny funds, like $5 million funds in Asia for water sanitation, to $1 billion fund investing in Eastern Europe in microfinance, just to give you the span of the different actors we're working with. So that was a bit of self-promotion, which usually we don't like in a conference, so I'll skip.
We are the same here, but it's fine because it explains the background quite well for you.
Very informative, actually, very informative.
Okay, thank you.
You're forgiven.
So if my screen can change, so maybe you see it. Yes, you see it. Impact investing. So let's start with a bit of a difference between what we call responsible investment, sustainable finance, and then impact investing. So basically, the impact investing term has been coined, I would say, around like 12 years ago already. And the definition here is relatively clear. That's the whole set of investments that are made into companies, organizations, projects, any kind of types of investees, but with a clear intention, and the term intention is very important, to contribute to measurable, second term, very important ones, measurable, positive, social but usually try to have the two at the same side, and or environmental impact alongside financial return. So all the terms are very important because this very simple, very short definition really summarizes what we aim to do with impact investing. So if I start from the end side, you need to have a financial return. So we talk about investment. We don't talk about donation. We don't talk about philanthropy. We don't talk about grants. They are needed. There are a lot of topics that are to be tackled and where you cannot invest because the projects are not yielding any return. It creates value for the beneficiaries, but you cannot receive any return in compensation of the investment risk that you've taken. So impact investing is just narrowed on these aspects where you can actually generate a return.
But then if you look,
the definition is.
I know if you look at these principles and the structure, you could very easily take some of them and apply them to, say, donations, when it comes about the measurement and how you want to. So the only aspect that really is different is the investing part. So we could use this framework for other things as well. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Definitely. I hope that when donors are applying their own program, they have an intention to contribute to positive social and environmental impact, and they measure it for sure. And that's what we know most of them are doing. But here, indeed, as you say, the impact investing is the financial return. Doesn't mean that the return needs to be on a high side. Maybe you see on the graph there are two sides on the return expectation. There are the competitive financial returns down to below market financial return, and then the whole let's say spectrum across all of this. And when we work with our partners, we don't exclude neither of the two sides. We don't say, well, if you want to generate 8% return on private equity investing in SMEs that are having an environmental impact, for example, in Africa, we don't go because we feel it's too high. And at the same time, we don't say to investment strategies that are saying, well, we aim to be sustainable and to generate a 1% inflation type of return. We don't say to them, look, it's not enough. And so for us, impact investing is all of this. What makes it different with responsible and sustainable finance is that it has a clear intention, and the intention and the measurement of the impact should be really embedded into the impact investing. So responsible investment, where you do obviously a negative screening. Well, here it's just do not harm. So obviously you don't even intend to have a positive impact. Sustainable finance, you make sure that by on top of do not harm, you have a certain ESG approach to all your investment philosophy, but maybe you don't pick de facto the specific theme or the specific enterprises that would have a scalable and very positive impact on one of the different SDGs that you've discussed yesterday, and then we've discussed just before with Daniel. So first, definition of impact investing, so that we are all set on this, so that I can explain to you how this could connect to crowdfunding. And so impact investing didn't start 10 years ago. Obviously, it started way before. And it's only whenever people started to think about, well, actually what's behind all this philosophy investment is about creating an impact, that this term was created. And you might know the network of the global impact investing network with hundreds of members who are, collecting, exchanging information, knowledge, and then collaborating to actually make this sector more professional and going into the right direction. So it grew from, $1 billion, $2 billion of assets, etc. And you will see a slide afterwards. Now we are in trillions of really true impact investments. And so I would say that the sector is professionalizing. And the GIN, so Global Impact Investing Network, the GIN has launched a few years ago, I think it was 2 years ago, 6 categories of action where we can think about connections with the crowdfunding sector, where the crowdfunding sector could actually contribute to some of them. So identity first was to say, well, there was a bit of mix of everything. Everyone was saying, well, I'm an impact investment fund. And so it was not like about impact washing yet, but for investors, it was not clear. Is it really impact? So there needed to be definitions, best macro practices, principles, just not to give rules like regulations that comes from Europe and say, well, legally binding things, but just to say these are the best macro practices. If we talk about an impact fund, an impact investor, this is what you as an investor also may expect from that kind of investment fund. Then the behavioral and expectation change in the sense that, well, it would be good to have the alignment of the fund manager with actually the impact that they want to generate. That's important, that it's not only about, well, I'll try to generate some impact, but I'll also have a clear in-house incentive to get there. Then one of the few actions to actually go forward with the impact sector, they said we need more products. And that's where crowdfunding could really play a very important role. The first and most difficult part of all these aspects about product is that currently we cannot reach retail investors. There are millions of retail investors who would love to contribute to impact investing, for whom, impact investing speaks to them directly, but they cannot because of regulation. Investor protection, you have the same issue with in the crowdfunding sector. And so for the moment, all the funds that are created, except some of them, which are a bit more liquid, it's very difficult for private investors to actually, private individual investors, retail investors, to get access to the interesting projects underground. Some microfinance funds, because they are somehow liquid, have managed to do so, but it's still quite difficult in terms of placement and marketing to all retail investors. Mm-hmm. So when we saw, and I remember a conversation together with you, Oliver, at the time, when we saw this happening on the crowdfunding, we said, well, that's maybe the solution to our issue, to get more retail investment to impact investing. And then tools and services, we need more ratings, we need more data, and I like the intervention of the first speaker, Goteo, saying, well, we are providing data. That's what we need in our sector. We need more rating agencies. There are labels, there are rating agencies, there are processes being put in place. We need this to be to become benchmark, so that for investors, they try to link it. They manage to link it to what they are used to anyway. Mm-hmm. and then educating people, etc. And then and the rest, at the end, having help from a policy regulation point of view to really push it forward. So,
look, Arno,
just to say that impact.
I really like your slide. If I look at these 6 issues, we have the support from the policy and the regulation. We've seen that on Wednesday, crowdfunding is being harmonized to some degree. There will be competition on pan-European level for investments. Now it's time for the market to show that they can take care of this. We have education and training. I mean, we at the ECN, we have partnerships in Italy now, soon in Spain, where we actually do training on the ground. There's other organizations that do this. We will move there. Tools and services we are a bit weak on, but I think potentially people like you can help us there. Identity and behavior, I think, is partly already there. Products, we have some platforms. You mentioned GIN. At the time, we worked with the other impact investing network called Tonic. I always like this. We have GIN and Tonic because they deal with, kind of like angel type of investors. And so we looked at that and tried to structure something, and it was not scalable in the sense of crowdfunding. So this is, I think, a real issue, is to develop products that work already in crowdfunding. We heard some examples yesterday. We will hear again today from one, but also that that links to your industry. That kind of there's a downscaling and upscaling. And so this is, I think, where people like you have to play a real role in the future in order to get this market up. So I just wanted to mention gin and tonic, that's all.
Yeah, I got the point. Okay. Getting again into what it means to be an impact investment vehicle. Initiated by the World Bank IFC, so the private sector branch of the World Bank, and directly followed by the whole industry, there are 9 principles, like we call operating principles for impact management. So they've been set to say, okay, you say you're doing impact investing, but how do you do this in practice? How do you make sure that your intention will actually lead to real impact on the ground? How do you make sure in all your processes, from the design of your strategy, from the design of your structure, so from the design of your incentive mechanism, you are actually taking the right decision, looking at the impact at each and every steps of your investment process to actually generate the impact that you say or you sell to your investor, you promise to your investor. So these 9 very high level, again, non-legally binding principles are really good, and I would invite everyone who wants to know a bit more about impact investing to find on the web. It's very easy to find on the GIN about these 9 principles. They're really simple, but they really explain what impact investing is. So first, you need to have a strategic intent to generate an impact. So you need to define your impact objectives that are consistent with your investment strategy. So you cannot say, let's say, I want to have an impact on gender, and never design your investment strategy to favor gender companies or SMEs or projects that have a definite impact on it. It seems obvious, but we've seen a lot of funds saying, for example, we do microfinance, and then we map all our indicators on gender, whereas they didn't pick the microfinance institution from the fact that they were better or less good on the gender aspect. So it's quite important to set correctly the objectives. It's a very difficult task, but that's the basis. Otherwise, you cannot say where you go. I mean, the ship goes anywhere. Then you need to manage your portfolio. You cannot say that I'm only investing into the most impactful companies. Obviously, you will not have the unicorn of impact all the time. Just like in normal investment, you will need to have a kind of what we call a portfolio management. So it's a composition of different investments, which as a whole, as a portfolio, will actually generate the impact that you want. So this needs to be managed, and not just being from an exclusion point of view. It's not sufficiently impactful on all my 5 criteria, so I don't take. So obviously, this you need to know. Then once you have the strategic intent, you go into the origination and structuring. So obviously you need to, and you do that usually by developing what we call the theory of change, meaning what's your theory of what will be the impact of your money invested into the project that you select. And how do you make sure in a way, or you make sure, how do you convince your investors that this in a causal link will actually generate the impact that you want to have with your fund. So you need to establish actually the contribution of your investment towards the impact at the end. That's very important, very difficult again to do, but quite important. And then before you invest, you assess the expected impact of your investment. So after 5 years, I expect that if I put my money, my 1 million into this investment, I will get this impact towards my indicators that I had in the past. And then after, obviously, once you have invested, you monitor and then you follow on these investments. And that's what is portfolio management, monitoring of the progress of each investment against the expectation. And then it's not done there, because you want to make sure that whenever you exit, the company doesn't change and then doesn't shift completely and doesn't go very negatively on an environmental or social impact side. So you want to make sure that you have in a way, a responsible exit directly from you, but also that the project itself, which is very, again, quite difficult, but that the project itself will continue to generate some impact. And then the last principle, eighth principle, is about learn and then improve. So what you've done over the past, you should always improve. And then the last point is about being verified. So showing that, which again comes back to your title of this day, about transparency, being transparent to your investors, having an independent verifier, explaining, certifying in a way, verifying that you are actually applying these principles. So 9 principles, very interesting. It shows really, it's really recent. We just had a few days ago the 1 year anniversary of these principles and of the signatories led by the IFC. But it shows that the industry is taking it very seriously. So not to fear that a lot of people were doing a very wrong thing, but just to make sure that investors are taking it really seriously also, and making sure that we go into the right direction. I'm trying to speed up because I have a lot of things to share. Just to give you a flavor about the size of the market, I talked about several billions at the beginning. Now the IFC will estimate that the market is around $2 trillion of assets, which has an intention of impact. So there are here the top 3 circles you see are the entities that are actually measuring their impact, whether private investors, private funds, or DFIs, and then the rest, which needs still to get there. Measuring the impact just doesn't have, for the moment, they have the intention, but they don't really measure, they don't really report. But it's growing and growing and growing for the moment, and we all know this is highly needed. So where is it invested? The respondents to the survey of the IFC, which were actually the signatories of these operating principles, this is a survey through them. So mainly sub-Saharan Africa. This is still a big focus for a lot of impact investors. Latin America, South Asia, and then you have the rest of the world, but still mainly these 3 continents. Not a surprise, obviously. In terms of theme of investment, on the top of it, you still have the general financial inclusion, which is obviously microfinance, SME finance, but any form of financial inclusion where obviously crowdfunding platforms are really contributing directly to it. So providing loans to SMEs, whatever kind of SMEs in general, but providing loans in SMEs. Then the green investment, agriculture, obviously is still on the top topics. And then at the bottom, you still have some themes that are still a bit difficult to invest in, which are education, housing, and gender lens. And that's where maybe the whole of the industry should focus even more, because obviously there is a huge need into that. And you see that then the investors have reported on which SDGs are they targeting, and without a surprise, affordable and clean energy, zero hunger, and then general economic development are on the top. But generally speaking, they tend to focus on a lot of SDGs. So quite growing market, getting more and more professional, quite diversified, still a lot heavily, let's say, targeting emerging markets, although it is becoming more and more also here in Europe and Western Europe. But that's where it came from.
What do you, Arno? What do you think when we go back to Daniel speaking before, and how the EIB is now using this new taxonomy and the ESGs, so basically wanting to push everyone to become some form of impact investor or sustainable investor. And if you look at the trends with the COVID crisis, and let's say the need for investment in healthcare in some countries more than in others, but in general also in Europe, gender equality anyway, but also race equality, which we now have a big movement all over the world. Do you think this will change, and we will see more investment in Western Europe, which is something that maybe crowdfunding can also deliver initially much easier? Do you expect that, or?
No, definitely. And I'm not saying there are no actors, and I'm not saying there is no impact investing in Europe. There is plenty. There are billions of impact investments in Europe. I'm just saying that the attention of most of these pioneer impact investment fund managers, DFIs, etc., have been towards developing countries. But for sure, local investment and social enterprise, but not only social enterprise, but just all enterprises that have a positive impact on people and the planet is also booming here. I mean, we are a B Corp. I don't know if you know the concept of a B Corp, benefit corporation in the US, which is to say, well, using business as a force for good. Yeah. In the sense, we try to push companies to see entrepreneurship as a means to have a positive impact, generally speaking. You don't need to go into Africa and provide solar panels to have such a positive social and environmental impact. You can do that here as well. So definitely there will be more and more. And there will be more and more investors to say, look, it's all fine to invest in Africa and Latin America, but here, show me some products. Yeah. So if crowdfunding platforms are even there to provide, there will be a huge potential and a huge interest from investors. And that's what so we're not fund manager, we're providing support to the ones that are fund managers. So we're not investors, but still we are in contact with some investors. And in most cases they say, well, all of these products are really interesting, but where are the ones that are investing in Europe? Yeah. So they are, but I think there should be even more.
I know, given the time, we have about 15 minutes left, and can you tell us a bit who the actors you know of are in the crowdfunding sector that may now enter impact investing, or may approach you, or you hear of in the market?
Yeah, sure. So here I have a slide, if we can show it, I don't know.
Very convenient.
Yep. Well, we are not, and that's what we would like to be, and really open for collaboration, but we're not impact investing, crowdfunding specialists. So I cannot say that of course, yeah. We've worked years and years with crowdfunding platforms. Obviously, I mean, you all know the Kiva platform, which is still a donation-based crowdfunding platform that works through microfinance institutions, and from there they started in 2005. I don't know how much I think I took notes of how much they managed to raise. Well, I think it's $1.5 billion that they managed to raise for the last 15 years, which is really, I mean, it's really impressive for microfinance. But we see a lot of new actors, whether in Europe, Lita, I mean, you had Lita yesterday, that have the same kind of impact investing approach. Lend a Hand, based in the Netherlands, and they are active in all countries. Developing countries mainly. Lendable is not per se a pure crowdfunding platform, but it's a platform to gather impact investors to invest into fintechs in Africa. So they have a kind of a crowdfunding philosophy, but we've seen that they've been backed by the Dutch development bank, FMO. Trine, I will explain a bit of a case study. It's a very interesting Swedish crowdfunding platform who is, whereas Lita, Lend a Hand, maybe Lendable are more generic a crowd lending or crowd equity platform. Trine took the position to say, well, we focus on a specific sector, which is energy access in Africa. So they really focus on this, and they only they provide access to these energy projects. Same with Energize Africa, etc., etc. So it's coming. A lot is, and this you can get it because it's quite easy to understand in terms of two sides. On the demand and also on the understanding of what is the product, there is a clear focus on energy access. I mean, Trine, Energize Africa, Ecology, Better Invest are focusing on that. And we know, I mean, we are collaborating with some DFIs who are currently looking at actually supporting some of these crowdfunding platforms. Obviously, there is a huge demand from investors, but also institutional investors, thanks to these crowdfunding platforms, to alongside private investors injecting money into access for energy. And that's where, and you see one of my last slides, that's where I think crowdfunding platforms have a huge opportunity in these co-investment processes. So let's not look at crowdfunding as a bit like blockchain, as an end. This is just a channel, just like investment funds are a channel to channel money from investors to the projects. But when we advise our partners, we say, well, first tell us what's your investment strategy, what is your investor strategy, what kind of investor you want to target, and we'll put in place for you the right structure. And it could be a fund, could be a foundation, could be a securitization vehicle, and hopefully it could be a crowdfunding platform. So maybe I don't know if I'm not stepping on the toes here, but I'm not diminishing the let's say the importance of crowdfunding as a sector. But to me, this is one of the tools. This is part of the toolbox that you should provide to impact investment fund initiators, and it could be used in combination with many different things. It's complementary, really complementary for the investee, for the investors, as one of the means to actually have the impact on the ground. So,
thank you very much. I totally agree.
There's a lot of collaboration.
Arno, we don't see crowdfunding as the solution for anything. It is a tool, and I think it needs to find its place and needs to be accepted in that place as well. And this is the kind of path we are currently going through. But you said you had a slide or so on the opportunities. Maybe you can. Sure,
let's jump into this. So I had one slide to you, and maybe I invite you to go and look at the let's say the website of Trine, and this is the model. What is really interesting with all these crowdfunding platforms, they actually partner with local actors, and here they partner with Bbox to give access to solar panels. They managed to raise $1 million in just 1 month for the installation of 10,000 solar systems in Kenya. So this is an example in Africa. Another example of friends of mine, actually Frédéric and Xavier, who founded Mozeno in Belgium. And so that's why impact investing is not only an emerging market. Here, it's about helping, let's say, private individuals to finance solar panels in Belgium together with an energy company, Luminous. So their crowdfunding platform has helped, and that's what is also interesting with, and that's the key of the crowdfunding platform teams. They solve a lot of problems. They solve regulatory problems. They solve structuring problems. In some cases, ethics, risk management problems. And that's why I think it's very good to see all these hundreds of platforms popping up everywhere, because we need these small teams of 10 people to solve these issues for the investors and for the investees. So thumbs up to all of them, including Mozeno. So 2 slides to finish. One on opportunity, and then to reach out to these opportunities, what you need to do, you, the sector of crowdfunding platform. So I see, well, first and foremost, obviously, for the moment, impact investing is struggling with getting access to the retail investors. So this is a massive opportunity. If you manage to team up with impact finance fund managers who have the experience of a specific investment theme, who have the credibility of due diligence, who have the presence on the ground, and crowdfunding platforms are teaming up with them, then they are able to access the retail investors. And we talk about billions. And my interest is not obviously in terms of billions, but by having the retail investors getting into impact investing, you change the mind of people as well, because they realize that actually you can support good companies in general, so that are making a positive impact. What I was saying, complementing the toolbox of impact investment structure, I'd love to have partners in the crowdfunding sector who tells me, look, I have a white label crowdfunding platform. So whenever any fund initiator you want to discuss with, let's see together and let's try to onboard these fund initiators onto our white label platform. So this could be very interesting. From an investee point of view as well, they receive direct lending, they receive equity, and it's good that they know that there are some partners that could provide through them access to retail investors into their entity. So it's also a complementary source of funding for all these relatively large, in certain cases, impact projects. Co-investment opportunities, that's what I mentioned. And DFIs like EIB, they love whenever you can say, we are blending our money with private money. I'm a catalytic. Thanks to my money, I managed to raise my, let's say, 20 million. There was another 80 million, maybe it's a bit big, like with my 2 million, another 8 million hasn't been invested by private investors. And crowdfunding is a tool to do that. And then we go into a bit more technical aspect, which are issues that we see in our sector. And maybe one of the most important one is secondary market. We don't have a secondary market in impact investing. It's very difficult. And maybe crowdfunding within the crowdfunding sector or crowdfunding sector with investment funds could actually buy back some of the projects and then sell it on to other investors. And then having this secondary market, which still is one of the biggest issue in impact investing, because for investors, no liquidity, difficult to exit, etc. So for some, it's a constraint, and they say, well, I don't go into this, too risky for me. So maybe there are some solutions behind. And then I have a lot of other ideas that I'd like to discuss with some of you, the specialists, where maybe the power of crowdfunding could be used. But to get into this, I must say that there is a lot to be done yet, still, I would say. Not that it's not possible at all, but it's important that, as I explained, if you go into impact investing, you need to be true to the principles of impact investing. So you need to have very strong environmental and social management system. You need to adopt and really implement these operating principles. And maybe the best way to do it is to partner with the actors who have been into impact investing. And as I mentioned, saying, well, these are my let's say, white label platform through which you can actually deploy this. And then maybe the last aspect is about the cost. When we look and scrutinize a bit the costs, well, let's say retail investors would say, well, that's fine, I'm happy because anyway, for me, it's difficult to get access to these projects. But more institutional investors would find it difficult or would compare directly crowdfunding platforms in terms of the operating cost to the traditional 1% or 2% that they pay as management fees. So I'm not saying that, I mean, obviously there are costs to cover, but we need to find solutions behind. And then building partnerships. The impact investing sector has evolved over the last 25 years. So there are very professional impact investment firms in general. And so I think we need to go fast, as mentioned by Danielle as well. We need to be very fast. So it's not, that's good that you do everything in-house, but it's even faster if you do this in collaboration.
Arno, thank you very much. Look, in the interest of time, I know you still have a call out there that you should now address, because we have only about 2 minutes or so before the director comes in and tells us to cut off.
Okay. Well, that's a call for partnership, and that's what I mentioned already several times in my presentation. In Africa, we have set up an, let's say, white label fund platform for, let's say, small first time, second time investment advisor, where we basically we tell these young investment advisors, if you're a specialist of your investment strategy, of how to invest into your impact projects, look, we can onboard you, we can host you on our fund platform you focus on your investments or your deals, your beneficiaries or investees, focus on your investors, and we'll do the rest for you. So basically, technically, it's a legal entity where you can open a compartment that is fully segregated from the rest of the legal entity, and where you can really plug and play your investment strategy. The whole machinery is there. You have an auditor, you have a bank, everything is there. We have an IT system to manage. I'd love to provide the same kind of solution for crowdfunding. Why not? Saying, look, we have a white label impact crowdfunding platform where you can really run not one project, but your crowdfunding campaigns in general, one after the other, and you don't have to recreate, etc., etc. And then you benefit in a way from 13 on our side, 13 years of experience on what is impact investing, what is not, and then so for initiators, they also get access to what is obviously a big hurdle for most of them, which is the IT side of crowdfunding, the data scientists, and etc., which makes it the beauty of crowdfunding. And if you can solve this, I'm really sure there will be explosion of crowdfunding together with impact investing in the future. So call for partnership, call us, and we'll be happy to discuss that.
Thank you very much, Arno. This was really exciting, very good. The call in the end, we had this already on the first day. There was a panelist who said, that if you have a white label platform, it actually becomes much easier for you as a product owner because it's always the same documentation. So we may see how the market develops. I'm sure not everybody will be happy about it. But I thank you for the offer. Thank you for the interesting and detailed discussion. And we have to unfortunately say goodbye now to you. But I think that was a valuable contribution. And I think Ira will join me in.
It's quite interesting, and it is relevant, I think, here, particularly in Central Europe, not just in the manner you've discussed with energy, but also when you take energy efficiency opportunities into account. So there's, I think, productive work that can be done.
Absolutely, yeah. So, Arno, thanks a lot again.
Thank you very much for the two of you. Thank you for having us, and happy to continue this.
Thank you for joining us, and goodbye for now. Yeah?
Thank you.
Good. So that was yet another great thing, and I'm very happy. So we bring in sustainable finance with something that has a long tradition. Impact investing is actually where you kind of come from as well, right?
Well, and impact investing is actually interesting because it's in some ways was a very difficult sector to get moving it into motion, and it has done that very well, and as he alluded to, very professionally. So I think there's an object lesson there for scaling crowdfunding, both in terms of the scale of individual institutions and also adding additional platforms to service what is, I think, a fairly broad and serviceable need, particularly in the sustainable areas we're talking about, sustainable finance areas that we're speaking about. Huh. So I think it's a really good example of what we can do as we continue to see this industry grow.
And I think this is for us a perfect point to lead over to our next section, and that's the panel discussion.
Yes, indeed.
So Ira, I hand over to you. You have a great panel set up. They will join you online, and you can continue exactly this strand of thought and run with it.
Great. So what we're going to do now is spend the next hour, we're going to talk about how the nexus of crowdfunding and sustainable data come together. We have 4 participants. Hopefully we have them all online at this point. Yes, we do. They're all there. The miracle of technology works again. Good afternoon, gentlemen and lady. We're going to be talking about how enterprises seek listings on crowdfunding platforms and how investors through crowdfunding can seek and obtain and conform to sustainability metrics as a part of that activity. This is a space that some of our panelists are very engaged in already, and some of them are basically in the middle of developing tool sets and promulgating tool sets that may hopefully make it easier for platforms, for investment targets, and for potential investors to understand what is and what is not sustainable. So what I'd like to do is ask that the panelists briefly introduce themselves in the order that we discussed, and to actually spend 5 to 7 minutes talking about what you're currently doing, thoughts on the subject. That'll take us into a period of time where we hopefully then can do some back and forth and have some questions, both the questions that that Oliver and I will have, and also questions from our audience. So, Conrad, can I ask you to start, please?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for being here. My name is Conrad Vries. I'm one of the founders of One Planet Crowd. What we do in the Netherlands, we run a couple of sustainable funds, and we have our own crowd activity, which is One Planet Crowd. Everything we invest in needs to be sustainable, which means that we always are looking for these sort of companies of energy projects which are usually pretty early stage, so we also make them bankable, but also have to at least tackle one of the SDGs. So we have structured our sustainability around the Sustainable Development Goals, and that's actually our whole sustainable framework is worked around that metrics. So either our investment proposals to the crowd or to our institutionals has to be tackled one of the Sustainable Development Goals, and in the Sustainable Development Goals we have our framework where we can measure also the separate KPIs. So if you are talking about, responsible consumption, for instance, then we also can measure how many products or what sort of use of material. So yeah, we are one of the largest sustainable crowdfunding platforms in the Netherlands, and we started in 2012, so also one of the early movers. And on personal level, I'm also one of the non-executive board members of ECN.
Yes, I was going to note that. Actually, you've been a leader in the space for quite some period of time, so it's a real pleasure to have you on the panel and leading off. Can we now go over to Pasi?
Yes, hi. I'm Pasi Väntinen, coming from Finland, and we have our company is Green Morrow, which is a Nordic-based investment platform for sustainable, responsible impact investing to finance early growth SMEs. And our sort of focus are on all of these, but we consider the sustainability important. So you have economic, environmental, social, or societal development, as well as good corporate governance as an important issue to consider. So we look at this as a holistic way, and we are now raising first funds, which are going to be focused on more on sustainable urban development problems and solutions around the world. But more information about that later. I have been personally following the sustainable development area around the world for 20 years, and especially focused on the cities and urban developments and opportunities and solutions there for the sustainability. And I have also spent about 20 years in asset management and investments in foundation and Finnish Entrepreneurs Unemployment Fund assets. And now 10 years been investing also in sustainable, responsible impact investing areas in all asset classes around the world. And for us, this is how we look at it as a frame. Is we also frame it so that we use GRI as a basic frame for the economic, environmental, social dimensions and metrics for the companies, and then consider the UN PRI and ESG factors, and then use 12 UN SDGs, and we build a frame for measuring the sustainability, responsibility, impact dimensions on this frame. But that's probably short on this on my side. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Luis, over to you.
Hello, thank you everyone for having me here. I'm a partner at Maze. We are a Lisbon-based impact investment firm. We accelerate and invest in solutions that are addressing be it social or environmental challenges. And we do it mostly in three ways. First, we have an impact VC fund. We invest in all over Europe. Then we also have an accelerator in which we work with extremely talented entrepreneurs and startups, all of them impact. And then thirdly, we have kind of a government, let's say, work arm in which we do a lot of public sector work through tools such as, for example, social impact bonds. So impact is absolutely central to everything we do. and sustainability metrics and how we measure impact has always been one of the toughest challenges that we've had. I think we've slowly learned how to tackle it, and most recently we fully adopt both the UN SDGs as well as the impact management project, which I think is an extremely interesting tool, and hoping we have some time also to go through it during this time. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And this is, I think, is a good lead-in to Heather.
Well, thank you, and it's a pleasure to be with you, and it's nice to see you, Ira. I am Heather Langsner, and hi from Brooklyn. I am an engineer by training, but have worked most of my life in finance, sort of the nexus between high finance, institutional investing, and using the data and the analysis. With my technical background, I've been able to sort of apply sort of a specialization in certain sectors and eventually got into renewable energy. And now I'm working at a company that's developing or incubating Eve Blue, a tech platform that would allow investors to understand the impacts and the sustainability of their investments across all impact across all asset classes, and conceivably this could be applied, to all types of investments.
I'm going to pose a question, or rather a sort of sub-theme in the thesis to ask people to talk about in the next round of conversations. We've heard, and hopefully you, most of you or all of you tuned into the earlier part of the conversation today, that there might be a disconnect between the Sustainable Development Goals and standards that the European Investment Bank is using. And one of the sort of questions that poses is, how can platforms, crowdfunding platforms, investors who want to use those platforms, and companies that want to sit on those platforms as investment targets, how can they reconcile, how do you help them reconcile the differences in standards so this doesn't become a tremendously complex undertaking? Maybe I'll go back to Conrad to start with that.
Yeah, this is of course an issue, because the last 15 years when we were involved in sustainability, either first through our venture capital funds, there's always a lot of discussion on what is the what's the definition, what are you measuring, and how can you consolidate it to serious reporting. And what you see now is that the EU taxonomy is also working out definitions. You see that in a lot of the industry is also aiming at the SDG targets. We have chosen 2 years ago to use the Sustainable Development Goals, because it seems to be a sort of market standard on at least a categorization of the sustainability KPIs. So yeah, in general, how we help the entrepreneurs is by explaining the SDGs and explaining how we operational them to more concrete KPIs, and make sure that they put it on the right way in their investment sheet, which we check, of course. And so they also can use it to their own stakeholders. So what we usually see is that after we help them setting up a reporting framework, which we need for our presentation to the investors, they usually use this same method to also report about sustainability to all the stakeholders, like employees, customers, or who wants to know about the company. But yeah, I think we should talk to each other also with the EU and see that we find an sort of umbrella sort of definition on the goal setting.
Buzzy?
Yeah, well, that's quite a challenging question, and also has spent a lot of time on pondering the different models and frameworks, and what should be the right one for the purpose, and it's difficult because it depends on what you wanna measure, what is important for the impact measuring. But there are many good choices, and of course this development that European Union is doing, getting the taxonomy right, is good, so that we would get some frames that could be used and agreed upon to be the right ones for globally is very important. For us is we also on the impact side have ended up in the decision that the SDGs are good frame for the impact measuring and choosing from there the relevant areas for the company to measure, and hopefully finding the way also that these SDGs will be the drivers for the business. But it's not easy thing to do, and I think it's still evolving, and of course we are also following what happens around the world on this. But for us, this is the SDGs for the impact. But in overall, like I said, we use the GRI as a basic introduction. It's easy to let the companies in to understand the whole frame of sustainability, economic, social, and environmental issues, and then using and bringing in the UNPRI and ESG frame, and then putting at the top and UN SDGs. But there's still a lot of work to do, and I think this has evolved a lot in the past couple of years, and there's still probably a lot of work to do, and for us to learn as well. So we are hoping that we get a good example as well from around the world on this.
Luis?
Right, I wish I had the answer for that. It's extremely hard, but I think we are in a better position that we were a few years back. For example, now you can actually pose the question versus UN SDGs. Before you would have to say versus X, Y, and Z. So there seems to be, I would say, a strong trend that UN SDGs are becoming at least the first level or quite agreeable level of reference for impact globally. So I think that's already a big win for the sector, but as Conrad and Paz were mentioning before, that's not enough. Like, we need to go deeper. Even though UN SDGs, I believe, sometimes are more adequate for specific contexts and regions of the world, sometimes they don't really tackle to the reality of every country or environment. But I think we need to be hopeful, because how many years did it took for us to get close to the generally accepted accounting principles? It took a lot of time for people to agree on how to measure profit, and even today, there are some people that are able to somehow be creative with the system. So I think it'll just take a lot more time for impact, because it's very complex, and one of the simple ways for us to put it from our experience is that if there's one thing we know for now, is that impact is not a binary thing. It's not a yes and a no. It's a spectrum. There are different levels. So we need to be able to be comfortable with some ambiguity, with maybe a multiple level of standards. So I think that's where we stand right now. But in a nutshell, I think the evolution has been very, very good, and UN SDGs have played a critical role on that.
Heather, how does this relate to the model and the framework, the software tool you're trying to build? How do you take the different systems into account in this tool?
Thank you. Actually, when I was hearing the other speakers, all this is good insight for me. But what our platform will be doing is sort of separating impact and ESG from the perspective of due diligence and then measurement of benefit from being financially invested into the project or the initiative. So I think from what we've been hearing in our networks is a lot of that they consider ESG metrics to be a sort of a checklist of sorts to assess the, I guess, financials or even like the overall stability of the investment, and then to go from there to pick among the different SDG or other frameworks, GIN or other, to identify, the set of impacts that they would wish to track over time. And then to be able, we have, a way of, you can actually see that with the LP's investment, that a certain amount of money would generate a certain level of impact over a specified amount of time from initiation to exit. So that's, something that could easily be applied to crowdfunding, maybe at a less complex level, perhaps just picking one SDG. And if it were something like energy efficiency, in my personal opinion, obviously that some of the metrics lack a deeper insight as to what actually makes something truly beneficial from an energy efficiency perspective, if that makes sense. For example, if you're going to be investing in Bangladesh, the networked microgrids that are being developed there are the solution that is probably going to work the best in Bangladesh. And so there may be, something where an entity that's trying to, in the crowdfunding environment, is trying to assess what it is that is going to be the most beneficial in the context. And so, allowing a certain amount of flexibility to define exactly what it is, what is going to be the most beneficial impact in a certain context will probably be necessary.
Okay. Question?
Yeah, just wonder when you especially when you look at the kind of the risk assessment, and then how do you measure positive impact? There's for me there's a value definition behind it that may not be quite clear in all these aspects that you need to look at, and then so exactly is this positive impact or not, and how can you measure this in a scale from 1 to whatever. So it has to be wanted impact. So therefore, there needs to be a defined value creation strategy that we agree on. And then we have right now this COVID-19 situation, which could happen any time through any other, let's say, impact outside of our kind of realm of activity that changes the day-to-day interactions, and then suddenly risk assessment becomes very different and assessment of impact becomes very different. How do you adjust to these kind of situations? You need to be very quick. You have running investments that may suddenly be not, as impactful as you thought they might be, and so on and so forth. So how would you reflect this in your tool, but also on platforms or investment strategies on platforms?
For me, on the platform, I guess the idea would be that you would set out by having an initial tool that allows you to assess what you think the projected benefit will be at the outset. So if the LP invests at a certain financial investment amount at the outset, we can do an estimation of what we think the projected, let's say it's in renewable energy, what the projected carbon offset would be over a given amount of time. Now, if, for example, that for whatever reason, that project didn't yield anything close to that type of carbon offset over that time period, and over time, as you began tracking in real time by getting annual data on a continual basis of that renewable energy project, and the annual gigawatt hours were just not reaching the level that we thought they were going to be, then we would begin to know that perhaps that investment isn't quite meeting the idea of what they had set out to achieve. It could be that it's hospital beds or some other metric, and picking one SDG and maybe looking at the the subordinated KPIs that are underneath it, in some cases may be a good solution, and in others, the project will sort of dictate what the beneficial outcome might be. But if they can give us like something somewhat tangible in this, like number of underbanked people being reached or something like that, we would have them begin to upload over time the results that they're getting to be able to see how it's progressing.
Okay, thank you. I mean, how would the platforms do this? With this kind of, change situation? If you have renewable energy projects and, we now have extreme weather conditions, lots of sun or no sun. So there are aspects that may impact our
I think, by the way, I think this becomes a really relevant question as we look in Europe over the next year and a half or so for the market to open up broadly to cross-border participation by investors in crowdfunding sites, which is a wonderful development, but it also arguably is going to raise the necessity to take due care with investors and inform them about these things. So I think in that context, it would be really interesting to hear from the platforms how they're thinking about this.
And then if you saw that somehow you weren't achieving certain benchmarks that we had laid out at the outset, you could do something about it. Let's say maybe there's technical upgrades that can happen, or maybe there's some changes in the project that could improve the number of hospital beds that are being achieved. That kind of things.
No, I guess it raises, from the platform's point of view, it raises the question: does the platform have a role that's larger than an intermediary role in that kind of situation where you have some ongoing obligation to performance if performance veers more than a certain percentage off a target?
Yeah. We had this on the first day. There was the call that this would be actually an aspect on the project level, not on the platform level. But then the platform is marketing it as a sustainable investment, and so there's at least an interaction between the two and a responsibility to connect. Yeah. I don't know if this is already an issue or it's just too theoretical, so then ignore it.
Have any of you gentlemen encountered this at all in terms of any of the crowdfunding or impact investing projects that you're handling or situations that you've handled?
Responsibility that we not only report about financial, performance, but also about sustainable performance. So, we not only the intermediary, but also the one who's managing and monitoring the loans for the crowd, which means that in our contracts, the entrepreneurs are obliged to give at least each half year. Well, we of course support them to do more, but at least once per half year, they should report on their financial performance and also on their sustainability performance. And this is according to the SDGs and KPIs we also present in the investment memorandum. So it's like a framework where they first say, hey, I will do SDG 12 on responsible consumption. I will do so much sustainable products with, my company will, make these sort of 1,000 electric bikes. And if they then reach 600, then they should tell the crowd, the investors, okay, sorry, it didn't work out. Or if they do 2,000, they can tell, hey, it was better than we were expecting. And if we notice that an entrepreneur is, lagging behind or it has troubles to perform, then we could try to help in the sense that we could find advisors, or we have a lot of, people in our ecosystem who could help the companies. But in the end, we are the financing part. So we're not stepping in the company. We are not VCs or private equity players in that sense. So there's the balance. So it's an indirect role where we make sure that the information is flowing between the investors and also the entrepreneurs. And we also consolidate this to the level that if somebody has a portfolio by One Planet Crowd, we can also present this on portfolio level.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very good.
Pasi, any thoughts on this?
For that question on the sort of risk adjustment or impact measurements is that we are looking at all the time the sort of sustainable economic dimension, social dimension, environmental, and then corporate governance. And of course, like these kind of crises is looking at how that affects all the variables in these areas as well as for the financial return, and then adjust and it's not just about the risk adjustment but also the business opportunity adjustments that we make. But it's quite new situation as well right now to look at and then test these models how they work, and there's still some work to do on that side.
Luis?
I don't know if I got the first question right from Oliver, but I got the understanding that part of the question was on how do we react to big changes like what happened, for example, with COVID, right? And trying to link that to how we measure impact. Here are some maybe 2-3 key ideas that come to my mind. So one is, again, we need to accept that there will be some ambiguity on what we mean with impact. And in that, I believe also that we should be flexible with the frameworks that we use. And so our role as intermediaries or investors is to then take that flexible framework and actually apply to the specifics of the issue we are finding. That's something that we do with all the startups in our portfolio. That's actually something that we do for ourselves. And if we were to take that example to COVID, for example, the framework that we've been using together with UN SDGs, impact management projects, is a tool that is quite flexible because it allows us to ask questions along 5 dimensions. So dimension number 1 is the what is the outcome that we are trying to achieve here. So COVID is really broad. So the outcome can be something like it's the vaccine that we want, or we want to change mindsets of people. So that would be level number 1, to understand what type of impact we are trying to get. Second layer would be the who. We cannot set a change in outcome at the global level, so we need to get specific either by geography or population, the elderly, the youngsters. There's so much that could be done to help us get a bit closer on what type of impact we're trying to get. And then there's question number 3, which is the how much. How many people are we trying to target? What is the degree level of impact that we want to have? It's easier if we're talking about vaccines, but it's much harder if we're talking about changing mindsets. And then there are 2 final questions, which are what risks are there? Some types of impact rates, second level variables. We all have seen how all these confinement measures do have significant economic consequences. So like any intervention, we need to consider that. And then finally is to understand what is our contribution versus what would have happened anyway. So my short, long answer to all of this is we need to accept there will be some ambiguity. We need to be agile and have flexible frameworks. And then we need to take that flexible frameworks and actually try and become very specific when then we're talking with startups and specific projects, and come up with a few KPIs and something that allows us to track and make sense of all of that.
I want to pick up on something you said, to sort of use it as the opportunity to ask a broader question, which is the extent to which COVID has, in your view, impacted the sector, impact investment, crowdfunding. And I asked that because obviously in the last 24 hours, at least from the point of view of the public markets, we've received a very, very strong reminder that this is not something that's simply going to be over. This is something that's going to be with us in one form or another, of which we really can't figure out, for probably quite some time. And to the extent that anybody can see at this point, I don't think anybody can see clearly, but to the extent that you all have views on this, I'm just kind of curious how you're seeing the impact or likely impact, and whether this has yet led to any thoughts about any modification in approach to the business, any change in focus. Just kind of curious how everybody's thinking about this, because obviously it's very much at issue.
well. So one is, I think it has, and maybe I'm being a bit romantic here, but brought investors and portfolio companies a bit closer together. At least in our case, we did a business review with all of them, really trying to understand, what is the impact that is having on your business, like how can you reduce your costs to extend your runway, and so I think that has brought together these two entities. I've actually had the feedback from many startups that they were some well surprised with how investors kind of double down, but they also have investors which kind of refrained, and they were supposed to close rounds and they didn't. So I think we are seeing actually quite disparate reactions. Some investors are kind of taking the opportunity to invest more, get more involved. Actually, there's some opportunity for interesting deals out of this crisis. Some startups that, for example, in our portfolio that are mostly online, actually performing quite well. So I would say, from my view, at least those two things, just getting closer investors and portfolio companies more close together, and then the fact that there are some opportunities, investment opportunities coming from the crisis.
Pasi, can I ask you to comment on that?
Yeah, thank you. At least for us, what we have tackled and the issue is on relates to corporate governance. So how do you communicate and how transparent are you on these issues, and how openly are you communicating about what's happening, both the internal, external stakeholders. So that has been a big issue, at least for us in discussion and seeing the impact. And then there's sort of the social dimensions, that how this have affected the employees and partners and everyone, and that, like Louis said, it's brought everyone together. So it's interesting to be seen that everyone is joining together and talking about these issues, whether it's an investor or the management of the team or employees and different stakeholders. So there's definitely a lot of good things happening as well as on that side. And then the third is that we are more looking at the sustainable economic dimension as well, that we're discussing, that companies are offered or can take a lot of loans, but how can you survive if you take a lot of loans, and how are the customer relationship, how solid is your cash flow, and so on. So a lot of that discussion has also been in the agenda, and all these sort of links to the sort of impact and impact drivers and sustainability drivers that the companies really have. But even though it's an unfortunate situation, but I think there's a lot of good discussions and recognition of problems that needs to be solved or reconsidered has been raised. So my personal experience is that this has been good in that sense, that a lot of things that we have not discussed or considered has been put back on the table and trying to consider for the long term. Well, that's sort of my experiences.
Yeah. It's a really interesting question. Is that it's an horrible disease in a sense of it happening, but it's also a wake up call, I think, for a lot of people about what we were doing with each other and also how we're using the earth. And what we see is that a lot of the models which were sometimes hard to implement, for instance, working at home or use your electric bike instead your car, it's now sort of flying into the market. So we also have a few of our companies which are doing actually really well. We have invested in an electric bicycle company. We invested in companies who can make it more easy to work from home. And we already went there 5-6 years ago because it was more sustainable. And now it seems probably that's also working out for this situation. So that's the good side. The bad side is, of course, that all the businesses where there's a lot of human contact, like bars, restaurants, or fitness, or and is attacking all the economy. So, the recession is deepening widely, which is a concern for us because we are in sustainable companies. It doesn't hurt us really bad at this moment because most of the business are involved in these sort of elements I talked about, and also about, energy production is still energy production. So the sun is still shining, so we still have solar energy. But in general, we are concerned about the long-term effects on the economy. And then the other thing is, which is also really odd, at least for the Dutch market, is that we already had a huge amount of savings in private hands, which was extremely high before Corona. And to Corona, it has even grown more. So because people cannot spend their money. So most people. So it's a ridiculous situation where first hand you see the government is having a lot of necessary quick aid systems, helping entrepreneurs, which is really good. And I'm really proud about the quickness of all the European countries have done it, but also in the Netherlands there were a lot of quick measures for helping SMEs. But if you look to the private savings, I think crowdfunding could really help because there's a lot of money in the hands of individuals. And if they go to the right companies, then all the money doesn't necessarily have to come from the governments. And there we see an interesting movement in the Netherlands where, I don't know what in other European countries is, but in the Netherlands you have this state guarantee loans for SMEs if they are in problem or if they need short liquidity. And these state guarantee loans were usually can only be used by the banks because it's like a banking product. So the government gave a guarantee to the bank. But due to the crisis and the necessity to really finance a lot of companies, they opened this guarantee scheme also for non-financial institutes like crowdfunding platforms. So this gives the unique opportunity that we now, as a crowdfunding platform, can partly use a state guarantee scheme to guarantee also the crowd that if they will lose money, that part of it will be covered by the government. So, like all crises, it's a bad situation, but it also opens a lot of doors which were not open before. So I think what we should do, and then I stop at my talk, is that we should really learn about the other crises because we all were already active in the credit crisis. We started in 2006, so we also went through that crisis. And then we all told each other that we should really change, right? After the credit crisis, that we should fly less, we should not lend so much, we should whatever. There were a lot of people saying good things, and it didn't work out. So I hope everybody who says now that things will change, I hope they write it down and they will execute it. So things really change. And if there's a new vaccine of medicine, let's hope it will be really soon there, that not everybody starts flying again and do everything that we do before.
Yeah. Heather, from the point of view of developing the tool, I mean, has this, over the last couple of months, have been things happen that have influenced the way you're developing the tool, but also, because we're talking about sustainable finance, have you seen this have, or at least have a direction of impact on the rate or hoped for rate of decarbonization of the economy?
Thank you, Ira. I think that, in light of both COVID and the recent difficulties, here and elsewhere regarding race, we've been looking for data sources that we can bring to the site that allow people to sort of assess companies or investments with that lens. It depends on the asset class, and some asset classes are more relevant to assessing this and not. For example, in sovereign, we can look at country preparedness and response, for example, in sovereign debt. But I think with regard to carbon output, I feel like, unfortunately, I'm skeptical that this will be a lasting dip in emissions. And unfortunately, the way that we assess carbon and the way that we have budgeted it to sectors hasn't really changed, and we kind of we'll be doing stranded assets on oil and gas and petrochemical companies, but for the most part, our assumption at this point is that the vaccine will probably get people going the way that they've been, as one would kind of unfortunately expect. And so it is like common understanding among technical people that the emissions scenario, that the dip that we had related with the pause, is not to last, unfortunately.
Okay. Being mindful of where the clock is headed, I wanted to ask each of you if you had any specific additional thoughts or comments to share based on what you've heard everybody else talk about over the last 45 minutes or so. Feel free, anybody who wants to start.
Well, with Luis, I agree entirely with his set of key questions, and that is actually something that we've built into the system to do estimates on in private investments, the who, the what, the how much, and for sure, in light of the fact that that COVID and other issues are sort of coming to the fore now, the context for those things may change, but definitely hearing from the other panelists for me has me writing a ton of notes over here. So it's been a pleasure to be speaking with the others.
Gentlemen, any thoughts?
Yeah.
Pazzi?
Yeah, I think it's been of course great discussions already before, but it's interesting to hear Conrad and Luis also say that they feel strongly about the SDGs, and that's the frame for the impact development and metrics and measurement for the future. I think that's important because the impact measurement it's difficult. I agree that as well. And there are so many different metrics, so it would be nice to get some mutual frame for that as well, and develop and make that more detailed and deeper model. But that was very nice to hear and interesting topics.
Conrad?
But maybe a thought for the other one. What I really would like to have is in the Netherlands is that sustainability should be part of your annual account, in a sense that it should be like your financial statement, that it should be a sustainable statement in your annual accounts. And that's always hard, of course, because you really need to, you have to have strong definitions. But it will be super if it will be there, because then also an independent, the accountant will look at it, and then now it's all on voluntary basis in the Netherlands at least. So I don't know what your thoughts on that, but it would be super great if that would, and I don't mind if it will be the SDGs or the taxonomy of the European Union. I mean, then we switch, but just to, to lobby to that way.
I support that for sure.
Absolutely. Well, Harvard has been trying to do some of that. They did, I think it's called impact weighted accounts. I think they were able to somehow when it's really sustainable, so environmental related, I think that there's like a chance we get there. And I really hope. In my early career, I was for a few years a financial auditor, so I wish there would be like the impact. No idea how that would get into profit. I would get in that, but that would be, I think, a dream for the sector. I think, and maybe we can start doing it for some industries. Some will be very hard to do, but why not start with a few? And maybe that could be the next. I don't know the expression in English, but like golden egg, maybe that would be that we all could try and strive for. But maybe another message, I was also happy as well. It's good to do this sense check once in a while with experts in the sector on how they feel about the frameworks and everything. And I think it's true, the sense that UN SDGs has kind of brought everyone together. I only hope that it doesn't, maybe it's too strong of an expression, impact washing, because when something starts to become very popular, there's a risk of abuse, and and suddenly everyone is contributing to like 2 or 3 or 5 SDGs, and then there's a risk of that losing its purpose. And so that's just something I'm aware of. But I think it's just a risk that needs to be managed and mitigated.
It might be worth just posing a broad question, but it occurs to me, based on, in part, some of what we've heard in the last several days, that as the EU firms up not only its program over the next 7-year period, but also its COVID assistance programs, that the standards it's going to apply could very well have broad impact for what has to be reported, because I think it's pretty clear that there are, in terms of either direct funding or support and guarantee tools, there are a tremendous number of sectors, and within sectors, companies that are going to avail themselves of aid in one form or another. And it seems to me that with sufficient reporting, you could actually get fairly far along this path of trying to basically make sure that other forms of reporting became more normative. But again, I'm thinking out loud, and we don't know what those standards are going to look like yet in detail. But clearly the discussion is ongoing at the very moment we're chatting here. So, Oliver, thoughts, questions?
No, I think that this was only quite really conclusive also for the end of the conference. I just wonder, in the situation that we are right now, and we're talking about crowdfunding, even though not all of you do crowdfunding right now, investing, lending, something that at least 7 years ago or 10 years ago has been seen as too risky. Citizens were not supposed to invest. You would go to your bank and invest, and then you would get a portfolio of something which you didn't understand. And now, since 7, 10 years, we invest or lend through platforms like Coonrad into projects. And so we've survived the first few years as an industry, and I think here quite good in Europe. And now we've proven ourselves to policymakers. We receive the support with formal regulation. But of course, this fear doesn't go away that crowdfunding is still a bit risky, or that the individual citizen isn't quite educated enough or up to it to judge the risks of investment. And now we have the COVID crisis, and we heard this already here. We have potentially a recession coming. We have certainly a dip in productivity. The financial markets are all shaky. The seasoned investor will now say, well, a recession is the best time to invest, and then you exit at the top. But is this, what do we say now to the small investor, the retail investor? Is this a risky time for you to invest, or how do you assess the risk even on a crowdfunding platform? Which is the right project, or how do you build a proper portfolio now, so that in maybe 5 to 10 years, when you get the exit or you get the return, that this is positive? So this is, for me, a question. This is probably difficult to answer, but maybe you have an idea of how we should guide retail investors now to approach investments. We heard there's a lot of interest, but we want this to make a positive impact as well, that they should get a return and have a sustainable impact on the economy. So how do we do this now? How do we guide them and advise them? Coonrad, you are the forefront.
Yeah, I can give some feedback. I mean, you have to, first of all, the risks are higher at this moment because we don't know where the recession is going. And that's something, everybody has to be aware of, and we also have to communicate that. And if you go one step deeper, then it depends, because there are some businesses which are actually performing better in this crisis time. But like explained before, for instance, the electric bicycle company, also food delivery or working at home, IT systems. So you have to be clear in which segments the risks are probably the same as before Corona, even less. And there are a few sectors where the risks are much higher. And therefore, I think that's also why I explained the state guarantee loans. Therefore, we need extra measurements to protect also the interest of the crowd. So if we would go now into, sustainable restaurant or a hotel, which can be really good businesses, but you don't know how long this virus will be around, and you don't know when we can have deep contact with people. So for these sort of loans, we need to have extra protection for the crowd. So I think it's like usually in asset management, we have to follow the market and we have to explain to the crowd where the chances are and where the risks are. And still there are people who even are willing to take more risk if they could help. But then we also have to be transparent on the risk they're taking. So it's a little bit more work for us now.
Yeah, but you as a crowdfunding platform, if I'm not mistaken, you're not allowed to advise, right? So you can only be transparent, and so through your pre-selection engages.
Yeah, but we could for what we have done in each investment proposal now, we have a separate text block about the corona effects on this company, on the long and short terms. So it has been part of our information flow now. And in general, we could tell what I could tell you, because that's not advising the crowd into one company. It's more in general. If a few segments are really hurt and a few segments have an opportunity.
Yeah, I don't know if anyone else has an opinion on this, Pasi or.
Yeah. But I can only speak for my own experience. But of course, it depends on what is your time perspective. But I've been. But invest in a long term, so I don't look short-term profits or whatnots, and in that sense, that I can personally say that experience that I've taken this sustainable, responsible impact investment metrics and frames, and use those to sort of screen the companies or the investment targets in the public markets. It seems to have worked quite well, even though it seems some time ago that we don't know for a fact how this might work, but it seems now that we have 5 to 10 year tracks on different asset classes around the world in the public markets. It seems that they have done quite well compared to the reference portfolios that we have also run at the same time to look at it. So in that sense, I going back to the earlier point, that I would also love to see that the financial reporting and sustainability or impact reporting or non-financial information reporting would be developing and be the same requirement for the companies. That would be a good, and the point is that if we could create this same kind of frame for the crowd finance, then I think that it would be a great and safe platform for everyone to invest on a long term. But I think that there is a possibility to find from this sustainable, responsible impact investing frame some kind of models and frames which could make the crowdfunding also better and more interesting and safe for all kinds of investors.
I just we're right at the sort of the end of our time, which I apologize for being able to get to everybody on this last question. But it does occur to me quickly that this may be an area where crowdfunding can actually lead by sort of setting a standard for this kind of reporting or disclosure, and that would be kind of an interesting impact, further protecting individual investors and also maybe trying to set a new standard in a market. So there's an interesting maybe point of play here that's worth further discussion, I think.
And we have a sustainable finance working group, and Koenraad and his team are also part of this, so maybe there's some input for this.
We have, Julie, just a minute, which is enough time to say and give my thanks to the panel for spending not only the time with us now, but the time that we spent preparing for this. I very much appreciate everybody's time, interest. Certainly I hope it's not the last time I speak to any one of you, and I would encourage you, if anybody that you know has not been watching you, this is all going to be available online, et cetera, and so you'll be findable later. So thank you very, very much.
Yes.
And thank you, Ira, for you as well, being patient and picking our brains.
Not at all. A lot more of that to do. Don't worry.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Have a good rest of the day.
It's been a great opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you and goodbye.
Thank you.
Bye.
So Ira, thank you very much. It was a really good panel, I think, and very insightful, coming also to the end of the time. So I think that is a good conclusion of our event.
Yeah, no, and I think it gives us something to actually take away from. As you said, you have a very active working group on this subject, so they've taken, I'm sure, some ideas, not just from the last comment, but from all of the 3 days.
I would sure hope so, and we have the recording, so we can go back to it, and we will follow up with some of the ideas that were generated here. And not all will be able to be, put into practice, but the discussion starts, and I think we had a lot of inspiration here.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, from someone who's been in the finance industry for 3 plus decades, I find this really interesting because I learned a lot of stuff. So there's a lot of new things going on that's interesting, and I do think there's an opportunity for ECN to show some leadership on some of these issues as it's already doing.
Thank you. So I think this is the time for us to say also nearly goodbye to our audience. We will come to our wrap-up now.
Indeed.
Do you have any last words? So, Ira, if you have any last words, maybe that's the time to pass them on.
Yeah, no, I think that what we're about here really is trying to figure out how individuals who want to explore and use crowdfunding platforms and have a specific interest and focus on sustainability can do that well informed. And I think what we've heard is that the platform operators are extremely interested in meeting that need. And I think it's actually interesting because it stands to free up a lot of liquidity in a market in a time when we can all use liquidity to make sure that the economy goes back to work and goes back to work more sustainably than where we sort of paused a couple of months ago.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Ira. Dear viewers, thank you very much for joining us. 3 hard days. I'm not sure if everyone was there for 3 days, but please watch it online. It will be on YouTube. Thank you for your questions. Thank you for the interactions. Of course, I would also take this opportunity, or like to take this opportunity, to invite you to, with me together now, thank the team behind the scene that you can't see and that is refusing to come in and to make this happen. So first of all, I would say thank you to the Deloitte team, Matej Rosig and Petra Bricht, for the video production, the visuals and the marketing of the whole event, to pull this together and to spread it out. You and your team were fantastic, and without you, we would have not had any of this.
They made us look good.
Apart from that, of course. I also would like to thank a few more people from Deloitte Legal, that is Marketa Letsnikova and Jan Prochaska. My Czech isn't that good, but I hope I'm not doing too badly, for helping with the organization of the event, helping us to get here under the times of COVID as well, which wasn't always easy, and to arrange all the things around this. And of course, my 2 co-moderators, Ron Given yesterday and the day before, and Ira Rubenstein today, to have at least one good-looking person in the room so that we come through the day a little bit better. Thank you very much.
Pleasure to do this.
To share your insight.
Really great to do.
I think this was a really good experience. And then last but not least, of course, the person, Jan Kadarabek, the director of the team that is behind the cameras and behind the technology. So to all you guys, the camera people, to the people behind the wall that nobody could see, thank you very much. And last but not least, of course, Dalibor of Vision Networks and also Deloitte, who actually introduced us and kickstarted this whole idea. Thank you very much, and I hope we have a good discussion to follow up to create a sustainable Europe for the future. Thank you and goodbye.
Yeah, indeed. Goodbye.